All right, thanks everyone for coming today to the second annual Ex-Muslim Speak Out Conference hosted by the Secular Party of Australia. Just firstly, if anyone doesn't want their photo taken, if you could please make yourself known to Andrew Bott. Just pop your hand up, Andrew, so he'll pop a yellow sticker on you, and your image will not be used today. All right, so just firstly, toilets are located down the hall and off to the left, and if you can please put your phones on silent. Refreshments will be served approximately 3 p.m. and if we can keep questions to the Q&A section after tea time. All right, so we have a great lineup today of credible, knowledgeable and informative speakers, which I'm sure you are going to find very interesting. Our first speaker, Armin Navabi, has flown all the way from Canada. Armin is an ex-Muslim atheist activist, founder of the world's largest community of atheists called Atheist Republic with over 2 million followers on Facebook, and an author of the excellent book, Why There Is No God. You are welcome to buy a signed copy of this book for only $25. All the proceeds will go to supporting Spartacus, an ex-Muslim who fled Pakistan and is now waiting in Nepal for his fate to be decided. We welcome Armin.
So I have very limited time, so I just want to ask you guys, would you be more comfortable if I go through this really fast and have more Q&A? Would you have enough questions to fill the Q&A if I try to finish this very fast? I'd rather have an engagement with the audience instead of just speaking for myself. Does that sound good? All right, I'm seeing some people nodding their heads. Okay, I'll try to finish this as fast as I can. All right, I don't know if I can. There's too much stuff here. Okay, so we have been, and by we I mean me, myself, and some of the rest of the speakers here, and also a lot of people that are not here from the ex-Muslim community, have been doing a lot in the past 5 years to get a lot of discussions that were not really tolerated by anybody from any side to normalize it and to have discussions that nobody wanted to have. And we have made a lot of progress, but not enough. And I think one thing I'm trying to do is to point to the things, to some hurdles that stand in our way, and to identify them and to point them out and call them out as the reasons why we are not growing as fast as we need to. Because the ex-Muslims, and again, this is not, I don't want to participate in oppression Olympics, trying to say like this is the most victimized group minority in the world. And I know that happens way too much. But it is one of the worst. If not, I'm not saying it's the worst. Obviously, there's so many different groups of people that we need to protect, and all of them deserve protecting. But the amount of support that this community gets compared to the amount of shit that they have to deal with is completely off balance. And this is one of this should be the human rights movement of our time. There's not that many other groups of people that you could name 13 countries that the punishment for their existence is death. And it's amazing to me that this hasn't become mainstream yet, and it's starting to, thanks to people like Rahaf, but not fast enough. So what is holding us back? One main reason is the atheist community itself, because many people within the atheist, and there's a lot, I don't even know if I could go through all of them, but a lot of people within, and this is a problem not just for the ex-Muslim movement, is for all things atheism related when it comes to getting together and doing any work done. A lot of atheists have this, are very sensitive about building any current community, because they think like, oh, you're building another church, this looks like another community. Like as soon as 4 people get together and try to do something, like, oh, it's a church. We're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what if we get together and start cooking and sharing recipes? Is that a church? Like, since when did religion have a monopoly over a community? this is actually the con that religion tries to sell, that without religion you're not going to have community, you're not going to have people support, some people need it, and atheists buy into that. We need to reclaim that from them. I mean, gay rights activism, for example, they got together, and at least in Western countries, they have made a lot of progress, not enough yet, but a lot of progress by getting together. And a lot of people are like, oh, you're changing the definition of atheism if you get together. Like, did gay rights activists change the definition of what it means to be gay just because they got together and fight for their rights? No. And you don't have to be, just like you don't have to be gay to fight for gay rights. And many people that are homosexual are not involved in gay rights movements. Same thing with the atheist movement. You don't have to be an atheist to fight for atheists. But many atheists are not part of the atheist rights movement. It's complete. Being an atheist is separate from being an atheist rights activist. They're separate things. We're not changing anything about what it means to be an atheist. There are a lot of examples for why we need to build a community. There's not that much support out there for us. When Christians are discriminated against, when Jews are discriminated against, when Muslims are discriminated against, there's some very powerful organizations and groups taking care of them. And not that they shouldn't, like, that's great, they need that, but there's not that much for atheists. Like, to be fair though, there's the International Humanist and Ethical Union. They helped the Atheist Republic, the Malaysian, what happened to the Atheist Republic's Malaysian consulate in Kuala Lumpur when the government tried to hunt them down simply because they got together and had a drink, and apparently that was not acceptable. So a deputy minister said that it's against their constitution, and they need to be hunted down. And the International Humanist Ethical Union was one of the only human rights groups out there that actually brought this all the way to the UN, which is amazing. But if it was any other group, this would be headline news. If any other government in the world said something similar, we need to hunt down the Christians. Like, even Trump doesn't go as far as saying we need to hunt down the Muslims. Hunt down the Muslims. Imagine if somebody said that. Or somebody said we need to hunt down the Jews. This would be international news everywhere. Even in Saudi Arabia and Iran, which do discriminate against Muslims and against Christians and Jews, no government official will go on record and say we need to hunt down the Jews or we need to hunt down the Christians. But a country as modern and as advanced as Malaysia, is supposed to be a tolerant Islamic country, the deputy minister gets to go there and say we need to hunt down the atheists, and he still keeps his job. There's not that much controversy. Only among atheists there's something like, oh wow, he said that, but there's nothing else. Why there's not much else? So, I mean, if that doesn't show you that we need community, I don't know what else will. Some other groups that do deserve some credit, like, I don't want to say that nobody's talking about it, like Secular Rescue, the IHEU that I mentioned, Atheist Refugees in Germany. But they're very small compared to what other groups have as support. And again, I'm not saying they don't deserve support, obviously. I just say, why don't we have something similar? Another thing from the atheist community when it comes to ex-Muslims specifically, and I was mostly just general with atheists, but when it comes to ex-Muslims, they, especially atheists in free countries, right? They shy away from, attacking Islam or saying bad things about Islam. And one thing this Rahaf story made it clear was how sensitive people still are about this. Like, a lot of media coverage did mention that Rahaf was an atheist and apostate, she abandoned Islam. But you can see how a lot of them wouldn't go mention that. Like, they mentioned that she has, there's discrimination against women in Saudi Arabia, the guardianship issues, political prisoners, it's even becoming, and these are all great, and it's even becoming more acceptable to fight against forced hijab. That was not something that was okay to say, but they were still sensitive about saying that, yeah, she said she left Islam. She didn't like Islam. She was an atheist, open atheist. And that was the main reason why she was being targeted more than anyone else. I mean, all those other issues are important, but you are really get put on the spot if you openly announce yourself as an atheist in an Islamic country like Iran or Saudi Arabia. But even though that was the main reason why she was a target, when they were covering her story, they wouldn't mention that part. There was even an example, and I credit to a YouTube channel, Nightmare Field, that pointed this out to us, that they were interviewing her, and she was saying Islam in her interview, but the subtitles didn't include that part. She was talking about her atheism and the fact that she left Islam, but the translation, no, that's too sensitive. I think that was in Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. And like another example, what the shit that we have to deal with. I don't know if you guys know about like another YouTuber called Apostate Prophet. He just recently had Twitter got completely banned, and he appealed it, and the ban was still confirmed. Like they didn't give his Twitter account back, and the only thing he did was mention that some of the violence that Islam endorses. There was nothing else, and we were sure that okay, this was a mistake. Once he appeals, it is going to get his account back. But no, the fact that this is still the norm, like the ex-Muslims, how many Facebook accounts have you lost?
About 10 right now in the last 12 months.
Yeah, like he constantly loses his Facebook accounts for saying facts that are undeniable. Like anybody goes like, hey, Islam says this, you get your accounts removed. Like, but it does. Like, what is it? What are you guys doing? But it's just so hard, and people just sometimes like, oh yeah, that's horrible, but so sad that. But if Christians, if they put like a Bible verse out there, or if Muslims put a Quranic verse out there, and if they get accounts get removed, they will start a shitstorm around what discrimination and all, not tolerating their views. Like we are not very organized. We're getting better though, right? But we're not very supportive. We're not yet as supportive of each other as we need to be. What I think is that it can't be just the ex-Muslim community, because there's not that many of us compared to the entire atheist community. I really think that the entire atheist community has to be more supportive of ex-Muslim. This is the civil rights movement of our time, and we need the rest of the atheist community to back us up here. One reason why I think that a lot of even atheists are a little bit sensitive about supporting ex-Muslims. You hear it a lot, like, "Hey, I like what you're doing, but I'm not going to say it publicly and say, well, you do you, good job. Like, I'm going to support you with that." But the reason is that a lot of ex-Muslims don't just come and say that, yeah, we left Islam and that should be normalized. Most ex-Muslims that I worked with, they want to say, yeah, we left Islam and that should be okay, but we also want to shit on Islam, and that should also be okay. And a lot of atheists are like, I don't know. So they say some atheists are going too far. It's just such a stupid thing to say. Yeah, we're pointing out to a book that says beating your wife is not just okay, it's mandatory. And it's not mandatory when she's disobedient. It's mandatory when you just fear that she might be disobedient. And again, just to be fair, there's 2 other steps that you have to accomplish before you start beating her. But once those 2 steps are not successful, then you start beating her. Then we're talking about a book that endorses taking women as sex slaves in war. It says that married women are haram to you unless you capture them in war, and they're yours. We're talking about a book that is endorsing slavery. We're talking about a book that says that all of us here, I think, unless there's Muslims here, no, all of us here deserve to be tortured for eternity. If any of these ideas came under any other label other than religion, nobody would shy away but calling it bullshit and calling it out as barbaric and hateful and disgusting, and no excuses for it would be accepted. But when ex-Muslims come out like, hey, this is bullshit, like, yeah, you guys are too right-wing, you guys are taking it too far. I support ex-Muslims, but not those ones that are so outspoken about Islam. Oh, fucking bullshit. Get out of our way. Like, if you're not gonna help, just just don't stand in our way. We don't need you. You're not being an ally. We're like, oh, we think everybody has a right to say what they want. Yeah, of course, like, congratulations. But when it comes to supporting people that are saying the most unacceptable things to say, you're shy away. You're like, oh, I'm too white to say shit on Islam. What the hell? Like, when was the last time you had to check your skin color to be able to call that bullshit? Like you are from there. You know Islam better. So you talk about that. Like, wait, you really think you need to be a Muslim? You need to live in Iran for 20 years to know that the prophet can't get on a horse and go to heaven and meet other prophets? Do you really need 20 experience? How much Islamic studies do you need to understand that that's bullshit? Another thing that, and I know some other panelists here disagree with me, which is fine, but I think one major hurdle in our way is also this idea of Islamic reform, which is the suggestion that, I think it's also another way of being, thinking people are too sensitive, maybe we shouldn't be outright against Islam, maybe there's another way we could make it a little bit better. It's just excuses to not call that something so obviously bullshit. What the hell are you talking about? When we are the people that say, like, maybe we shouldn't completely get rid of Nazism, like, don't throw out the baby out with the bathwater, maybe just, like, keep the good messages. Maybe if we could say he didn't mean the Aryan, maybe we're all Aryan, and maybe he's talking about the whole human race. Let's just look at it differently instead of abandoning the whole thing completely. I don't need that. And even, again, I saw with this whole Rahaf story coming out, some people, instead of calling her an atheist apostate and somebody that has left Islam, some people are referring to her as, like, reformist with Muslim origin. No, she's an atheist. What the hell are you talking about? She completely, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if some people that are close to her now are trying to be like, maybe you should tone it down a little bit. Like, shame on anybody that's telling her that right now, if they are saying. And I'm glad that she wasn't, at least for some time. I don't know. But these stories, and the more people come out as atheists, they are helping us. They are helping us. They are normalizing being atheists. They're normalizing saying no to an ideology that everybody should say no to. And don't misdirect the conversation to something else. We are, if they're helping more of us be accepted and more of us, even by Muslims, that's the thing that we need to focus on the aspect of this that is the most demonized, not on the stuff that already has made a lot of progress. I mean, focus on that as well. I don't know, but just don't ignore the part that needs the most attention. I mean, not we, at least I don't know. I'll talk to you guys later. I don't want Islamic reform, right? This is, I mean, people in Saudi, like ex-Muslims in Saudi Arabia, ex-Muslims in Iran, activists that do exactly what we're doing in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Egypt. They are risking almost everything to be able to say to a backward, barbaric bullshit ideology that deserves no place in the modern world. And so when they do all this stuff, the rest of us have no excuses to demand anything other than the abandonment of this ideology. Anything else is just cowardice. Like, you guys shouldn't be holding back. Oh, people need baby steps. People need baby steps. What are you talking about? It's telling you to kill the rest of us. It's in black and white there. This is our series of book that is telling us to kill the rest of us who have abandoned this religion. This is not an ideology that deserves to be appreciated as a beautiful culture that maybe some people could see some good messages out of it. Fuck that. We are living in the 21st century. We don't need ancient guys to live, even if the whole thing didn't have a single violent message in it. The fact, just promoting the idea that people that wrote books about societies, about the best way of living, about the universe, people that lived in a time that had no idea about how any of this shit works, and just promoting the idea that those books can be now used as a guide to life, even if it doesn't have any violence or hate in it, that idea should just be thrown out. And okay, so just to be clear though, and this is something that we had a conversation about, and I changed it a little bit based on our conversation. I am understanding of the intentions of some Muslims, that people that are Muslims and that want Islamic reform, they're just being ignorant. I understand that. That's fine. But the atheists who are supporting Islamic reform because they think that's maybe that's something that we could endorse more than the ex-Muslims because it's not as aggressive. You have to understand, if you're an atheist that is endorsing that, you are somebody that knows something is a lie, and you have decided to knowingly support spreading a lie. There's no excuse for that. You think you are smart enough or intelligent enough to recognize bullshit, but maybe these backward barbarians that, they're just stupid people. Let's just give them some other version of the bullshit that, as long as they don't blow us up, that's fine. Like, let's just be ignorant as they want. Just stay away from us. Yeah. So again, more people are risking their lives, risking everything to abandon Islam. So that leaves no excuses for us. We don't need Islam. We don't need Islamic reform. We don't need a new version of Islam. We can do better than Islam. We should do better than Islam. Anyways, let's do Q&A now.
Armin, why do you think it's the case that the Bible's horrific verses, just as horrific as the Quran, no longer carry sway in how Christians and Jews act for the most part, but it's not the same with the Quran?
Because of people like us that fought against religion, not the people that decided to come up with a new version of Christianity. A lot of people think that give credit to the Reformation for Christianity becoming more passive. That's fucking bullshit. The Reformation had no influence. If you look at the Protestants, right? They were very competitive with Catholics when it comes to brutality, and they were the ones that did the witch burnings. They were more anti-woman. They were more anti-Jewish. They were as violent, as bigoted as the Catholics. So it's just a different brand of bullshit does not help anybody, right? What helped the Christian world become less Christian was the Enlightenment movement, which was a movement against Christianity, against organized religion. And again, this is something I keep telling people, like, even when religions pretend to be more compatible with the modern world, it's a reaction to people that are fighting against religion. It wasn't from within the religion that decided to become better, right? And the fact that it's a reaction to people that fight against nonsense means that defense should never be accepted, because we have already challenged those ideas, and we have already made the progress of making Muslims and Christians ignore Christianity and ignore Islam and get ideas from better sources, from superior values, from people that are actually looking at things more logically. But so we don't need to look at Christianity and Islam in a more modern way, because when Christianity and Islam try to do that, that's a reaction to something that has already happened, which is better ideas winning. And the reaction, even with that reaction, that we are making that progress. What that reaction does is helps Islam and Christianity remain relevant. And we don't want them to remain relevant. We want Islam to die. We want Christianity to die. I mean, well, people say, well, religion will then one day die anyways. We don't need to do anything. Oh, well, yeah, but we need to make it die faster. And we think Islam is mostly harmful to Muslims, that Muslims are the #1 victims of Islam. And the position that we have against Islam is because we care for people, and we care for the harm. We want to stop the harm that Islam is causing. And even if you think we are idiots, and that's not true, Islam is not harmful, and if you at least appreciate the intentions, maybe you could be friends with us even if you completely disagree with us. It's not a hateful, to be against Islam is not a hateful position. It actually might be a position coming from sympathy and love. But can I get to the next person?
I just want to say, I think that when we kind of leave religion, a lot of, like for me especially, a lot of what I felt was like there's something missing, I guess. Like, and I've come to realize that a lot of it is sort of like having that community, having connection.
Exactly.
Like, it's helped me reach out.
You mentioned the normalisation of atheism. Like my father attended church to keep mum happy until she died. And I'm wondering, do you have any sort of sense of what percentage of people going to the mosques are atheists?
There's no, I wouldn't know. I know we run across a lot of people, like when we went to the Muslim convention in Houston, so, we wanted to interview Muslims to see what they think about ex-Muslims. Sometimes we got answers for people like, I don't want to be on camera, and then when we start recording, they say like, we're actually ex-Muslims, like you were talking about Muslim people that are going to an Islamic convention following their parents, but they actually were ex-Muslims, right? So we know it's common, a lot of people that can be open about it, but there's no way to tell how much because there's no reliable data on it. Yeah.
I have an observation. If you look at the world map as far as the old world's concerned, so like not the Americas and Australia, I've noticed that from Morocco down east through to Indonesia, there's almost an unbroken chain of Muslim influence. And the story of, I think it's Muhammad split the moon in half.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider that political line or Muslim line to be like splitting the old world in half, therefore being a metaphorical way of saying Islam is dominating the world?
No, because the story came from before Islam was that big. I don't think.
So the central idea being Islam is trying to spread by cutting the world in half.
I don't think so. I think Muslims, when they had when the Quran, at first, I mean, the main miracle in the Quran was supposed to be that the Quran is already a miracle above all miracles because it's beautiful. I don't know how that works, but that I think they felt like, Moses has fire raining from sky. Jesus brought dead people back from, brought them back to living. I guess a book is not enough. Okay, we split the moon, like splitting the sea. I think splitting the sea by Moses. I think it was just like adding something to the story that makes it more miraculous, more impressive than just a book as a miracle. Yeah. Okay. All right, I'm done.
All right, so our next speaker is Zara Kay, a Tanzanian Australian ex-Muslim atheist activist and the founder of Faithless Hijabi.
So I didn't actually have a speech prepared. Just thought I'd rock up and see how the conversation goes. But I woke up this morning thinking about what I'd say, and I was trying to identify that one moment that I had when I had given up on my faith. The one defining day or that moment that it just clicked when I'm like, okay, I'm an atheist now, or I don't believe in God. And I couldn't think of it. So I went back and, I went back in my memories and tracked the first time I questioned God. And it was when I was really young. I was 14. And I kept asking my parents, where's God's family? Who created God? And just questions like these slowly was when I gradually gave up on what was meant to be my life's purpose, or what I was meant to continue to pass on to future generations and other people. And after I came out as an ex-Muslim, I was, it was that question, how did you tell your family? Did you even tell your family when you immediately came out? I think it took me several months before I could even voice my opinions about not believing in God, let alone, being an ex-Muslim. I was always progressive in nature. Like I was always pro-LGBT, anti-homophobic views, anti-sexist views. And my family thought, this is a phase, it'll pass, it'll go away. she'll become more religious. This is all Western influence because she lives in Australia. So I was born in Tanzania and I moved out when I was 16. And I came out to them 2017, and I told them I'm an atheist, or I think I'm agnostic, but I don't believe in God. I don't think he exists. And I went through anxiety. I went through a very anxious period, and my family said, it's because you don't believe in God. I think you should pray harder, and maybe you'll find your way back. And that just angered me. And I was an ex-Muslim, but I was not ready. Like, I still had my views out in public, and I was not ready to do a podcast. My first podcast was with secular jihadists, with Armin, actually. And I remember what I used to say in my first podcast. I was still so shy from voicing my opinions against Islam because I didn't want to come off as anti-Islamic. I didn't want to feed into anti-Muslim bigotry, and that is not what I do. But a lot of times it is very, it overlaps unless you clarify it. You can criticize ideas. You can criticize ideas, but not people. So when I was in a room where Harris was debating with Uthman Badr from Hizb ut-Tahrir, and that was possibly that one moment that I knew that I had to be an activist, when he said apostates should be killed. And I interjected in the end, and I remember how furious I was. And I had to question his position from the audience. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? You're in Australia, and you want Sharia law to be applied in Australia or around the world, and Sharia law states that apostates should be killed. Is that correct? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, so you're saying that apostates and people, like half of us in this room, should be killed? And, he tried going around it, but that's when I realized that there are people like this that exist, and we need to fight against it. So I did my first podcast with secular jihadists, and then I had a chat with Harris, and that was great. I came out, I got to voice my opinions. It came with a lot of backlash because a lot of people knew my family back home. My family were embarrassed to go out. I've been sexually harassed so many times. Just day before, I got somebody sending me a message saying atheism is just another way to promote your prostitution. I took off my headscarf way before I renounced religion. It just felt uncomfortable to me. And when I took it off, I was told I was naked because I wasn't covering my hair anymore, or that I had no self-respect. And my sister said I did not value myself because I was showing my arms to men. And these were the little things that brought me to open Faithless Hijabi, because while there was ex-Muslims and there were ex-Muslim community, there wasn't a platform or a safe space for more women to share their stories without being ridiculed, without without actually having another woman understand. I know I've been through this, and I want to help. So as brave as I did, as brave as I thought I was, I did it, and it grew bigger than I thought. And I started it in October while having talks about it in July. And ever since, we've had hundreds of women giving out their stories in confidence, and I post them up. I post them up anonymously. And what I found among all these women is their questioning phases started very much like mine. It was this progressive thought. It was the anti-women thought, the anti-women idea that was promoted in Islam that slowly led them to start questioning even more of the theological part of Islam. That, it started questioning, what was Muhammad thinking when he said that women are half of men in testimony when it comes to giving their testimony in court. Yes. But what was also Muhammad thinking marrying Aisha at the age of 6? Right? He had multiple wives. He had sex slaves. Why marry a 6-year-old? And the mental gymnastics we face with that one story is that she hit puberty. She was not 16. Age was not a thing then. She was 19. Different sources quote different things. No, everybody knows it was child marriage. Why are you trying to rationalize it? And there were little things like this that pushed women away from Islam. And more women are now speaking out. So with Faithless Hijabi, I don't know how much time we have. I know. Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. I wanted to start reading out a story that was sent to me to Faithless Hijabi. So I picked out one from the hundreds that I have. So she wrote to me and she said, I was born in Dubai. I was forced to wear a hijab at the age of 11, but I rebelled. Sadly, that didn't last longer because of the threats, and that became harsher. I wasn't allowed to go out. I wasn't allowed to go on the internet. I got physically, mentally, and sexually abused by my own family. I left Islam knowing all that. Apart from the sexual abuse, Islam had justified it, and that the guardian isn't punished on the day of judgment. And because of this, I started reading deeply about the religion. I left it at the age of 17. I told my mom. Her reaction wasn't good at all. She forced me to pray. I couldn't continue college because they wanted a major with less men in it. I wasn't allowed to drive only until marriage. And speaking of marriage, when the opportunity came up, when my parents were questioning marriage, I said no, and I was told that it wasn't none of my business, that I had no choice. I couldn't endure all of this, so I left my country and sought asylum in France. I know that my country does not provide any rights for women. And in France, I was reborn. The feeling of when the sun rays hit my legs for the first time, I was in shorts. Listening to music being played on the streets, walking around without the fear of getting caught by one of your siblings. These things are unforgettable and precious memories for me. However, I'm still trying to rebuild my life after the abuse I've dealt with. This is, yes, a story from a Middle Eastern girl who left and sought asylum in France, but it's not limited to just women who are in the Middle East. It is very much so a problem for women in the West, in Muslim communities. I think a lot of times we always look, like Armin mentioned, that, you know, a lot of times that Rahaf is always in the spotlight for being an ex-Saudi woman, but she's also an ex-Muslim, and a lot of the media failed to acknowledge that. A lot of the media did not even talk. The episode in Four Corners, I encouraged, because I was kind of part of that, you know, helping Rahaf get out. I kept saying this. I know a lot of media won't focus on it. It's not only the issue of her leaving Saudi. The issue is that she's left Islam, right? And all the backlash that she got, not only from Saudi men, from other Muslims as well. You know, they're like, yeah, look, you know, Saudi is a horrible regime, and like, I'm glad that you're fighting against it, but like, why did you leave Islam? Like, Islam is great, but you know, and I'm like Islam is a peaceful religion, and you know, there's so many rights for women. So I dug into it further, and I started talking to more Saudi women. And I'm like, let's clarify this. What is happening? How many atheists are there in Saudi? How many Muslim women want to escape because they're atheists, not only because of the Saudi rules? And what I found out is there are plenty. There are plenty of women that are atheists because it's when it starts off with ideas such as abuse, they look deeper into it. When you empower women to know their rights, they're then empowered to fight for it. And this is how I feel that we can destroy Islam, or we can come out of it. And it always starts up by a personal story. It starts up by an experience, for most, at least in my experience, and the girls that have sent me their stories. It started off by the sexism that they had faced, the inequality in rights, and then it transcended over the historical and the theological part of it. And, you know, I think Australia has just not done enough in recognizing these minorities. We've just not received, even as ex-Muslims, men or women, we've not received enough support. You know, we've not trained psychologists, social service caseworkers on how to approach this. I went and I saw a psychiatrist when I had anxiety, and he was a Muslim, and I was like, maybe he'll understand why I came out, right? I was a fool. I thought he would understand, but I remember in Ramadan when I said something about Muhammad, he said, touch wood. This is blasphemous. And that destroyed me, and that shattered me. And obviously I never saw him again. But, you know, while he was trying to be as professional as he could be, there was so much, it's so hard being from a religious background to even understand ex-Muslims. And this is why I think these conferences are a really good start for us, not only to talk to people who agree with us, but to disagree with us. At the very least, get support from even the Muslims to go like, hey, I accept you for a choice. And I think that is a slow progress for us to move into a tolerant society. And I'm going to open the floor up for questions because I feel there might be more. Go for it.
Yeah, just a thought. I know that saying about needing support in the ex-Muslim community, and sort of very pushing forward atheist ideals. The way I see it, you've got ex-Muslim and you've got atheists. I don't see them being totally one and the same in interpretation. So have you thought of potentially reaching out to other religious groups for support?
So that is answer that question. So reaching out for other religious groups is just saying get out from one cult and go into another. When I posted up on Twitter about my Islamic views, and there were Christians and Hindus who reached out to me, they're like, Islam is barbaric, but Christianity is not. And I'm like, really? Is any religion not misogynistic or sexist? Is any religion going to give me the equal rights that men have? Have any women who've left religion received the same dignity after they've left it as compared to men? And this is what we'll discuss more in detail on the Islam and feminism thing. Well, there is the concept of community that we all lack that we all need, or some of us need, when we leave Islam or any religion. It's not limited to getting into another religion. I have friends. I joined the underground Australian ex-Muslim group, and then even then I made my other friends. I didn't need that sense of community to be a whole. I started creating that community within my friends, even those who don't. I have Muslim friends as well who don't agree with me and do not like that I'm voicing my opinions against Islam. But it took us a while most of them abandoned me, ostracized me, abused me, and even said that I should be killed. I had a poll up on Instagram saying, should blasphemous laws be punishable? They said, a lot of them, 80% said yes. And I posted a photo of me smiling, and I'm like, should I be killed because I'm blasphemous? Well, 92 people said no. A big number, about 32, including my childhood friends, said yes. And someone even went up, and I talked about my anxiety. I'm very open about my mental health. And I talked about it, and some of them even said that because you have anxiety, I hope you commit suicide, and that will be God's way of punishing you. So you can stop talking against God, or stop talking against Islam. And I had to shut down for a week after I received that. I don't think people realize that those negative comments have a very traumatizing experiences for us. So no religious group can ever fill up that gap when you essentially do not believe in God.
Sorry, I want to jump in. I know it's hard. It seems hard for you to overlap the two, atheism and ex-Muslim, but maybe it would be easier if you see ex-Muslim as a subset of atheism rather than a separate category. It's just a subset.
I was just thinking more of you sort of looking for more support.
Why would you seek support from the context you've left?
So
it's not so much you have to go join another religion. I'm just saying that there are, like, say for example, gay rights in Australia. There are sort of church groups and communities who support gay rights.
But that's a whole different ideology.
Can I interject? Sorry.
Yes.
So I understand your question in terms of support, but that is only enabling other religions to then take over the vulnerable ex-Muslims that have come up, right? That is only pushing for them from one group to another.
But it's not to the same level of violence.
Our violence is also one of the issue, but that's not limited to it. But I will get back to you on more questions after this. Go for it.
As I just said, we are going to have a contribution later from ex-Muslims who are not atheists.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, we have something coming up after. But yes, not in my experience, most ex-Muslims that have come out to me are all atheists. And when you don't believe in God, why would you go to another group for support when you already have that fundamental contradicting values that you do not believe in God or any dogmatic beliefs? And I'm time up, but I will be available for questions after. Thank you.
All right, so thanks, Zara. Our next speaker is Harris Sultan, a Pakistani-Australian ex-Muslim atheist, author of the book The Curse of God.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to say thanks to John Perkins and the Secular Party of Australia for hosting this event. It's the second event. He's always been giving good support to the ex-Muslims. Armin has said we don't want to say that we're the most oppressed group, but it's pretty close to the most oppressed group. We have the organization now we're seeing in feminist movement or the LGBTQ movement, but the ex-Muslim movement is still in its early days, in its infancy. And a lot of things are happening now that is putting us on the map, and Rahav's story is obviously being one of those stories that has actually brought attention to the word ex-Muslim. I believe it was first popularized or started by Maryam Namazi back in 2006 or 7, I think. So there's a 10, 11-year journey behind that. Rahav would have been, 7 or 8 years old when that started. But nobody knew. So I've been an atheist for probably about 12, 13 years, and I never used that term either. I was just okay with living my life, not being an atheist, and not speaking about Islam. My family is Muslim. They're okay. But there was no need to speak about it. And then something changed last year. Something changed. There was a crackdown in Pakistan of all the atheist bloggers, where the government decided to shut them down, the Facebook pages, and Facebook gave those details, their personal details, who these people were, to the authorities, and there was a massive crackdown. There was close to 20 people arrested. Most of them dispersed. Government sometimes did let them go, but the head of them was not let go. He's still in prison. We don't know what's happening. Hopefully he will be released, or maybe not. We don't know. But that kind of angered me. And then a couple of weeks later, there was a student by the name of Mashal Khan. He was lynched by a mob in a university, brutally murdered. When the body was given to his mother, she tried to hold his hand, and she said every bone in his hand was broken. Now this happened at a university, and as Armin said, the people in these countries, they're doing exactly what we're doing with a relative comfort. I hope there's no one outside with a vest, but it is happening in those countries. The people getting butchered by mobs for simply speaking about it. And the only downside is it doesn't hit the mainstream media. And you wonder why that is. I genuinely believe it's because, as Armin said, that people think that we're too white to talk about this. We don't want to bring that out, and we don't want to be called that you're Islamophobe, this dreaded term, whoever invented that. You're racist, you're a bigot. It's a bit of a conundrum. It seems like an alliance. It's that unholy alliance that no one could have guessed that 30 years ago. If ex-Muslim movement had started in the 70s, I think all the hippies would have been on our side. They all would have been saying, yes, let's just spread free love. It's okay to be gay. It's okay to be a woman and wear shorts and everything. But I think we were running a little late. I think we were 40 years too late. And now the Western world has gone through that metamorphosis where they've evolved through that. Okay, we've corrected our society, we've promoted liberal values, but now we're not going to talk. Now we also have to protect the minorities. And Muslims, fair enough, are kind of minority, but they are ignoring the minority within the minority. Rahav's story is just one story that, thankfully, it actually kind of surprised me why it actually got that big. Only because of Twitter, only because this underground ex-Muslim movement had become so popular that, for example, Armin's got 2 million followers on Facebook. His Twitter's got many thousands, and there's so many other famous ex-Muslims who have actually been doing this work for the last 7, 8, probably 10 years. And now they've built the audience that, okay, at least on social media, but still, there's no mention in the mainstream media. And that went out of control. Moment Rahav, this unknown 18-year-old Saudi girl, started tweeting, sending those frantic tweets that I'm in my hotel and they're trying to send me back. And don't forget, just a year and a half or probably 2 years earlier, there was another Saudi girl. Her name was Dina Ali. And she tried to do the same thing, but it didn't work. It just didn't stick. And now you can imagine how close, how delicate the life actually hangs in these kind of situations. Dina Ali was deported back from Philippines to Saudi Arabia. What happened to her? Nobody knows. Is she alive? Is she in prison? We don't know. And that is exactly what would have happened to Rahaf. But thankfully, something happened. Something changed, and we're excited about that. We're happy about that. But Rahaf's story is not just one of them. I try to get just one ex-Muslim. Now, I get calls for help from many ex-Muslims, mainly from Pakistan, because I'm Pakistani, and they asked me for help. One of them had a very touching story. I was hoping to get him on, but we couldn't really connect. And although I wanted to ignore it, just treat it like any other call for help, not because I didn't feel for them, but because of how much can I do? Can I don't want to bite more than what I could chew. But his story was so touching that this guy was on the run for 7 years from his family, from his friends, from the local religious imam. And I thought, okay, what can I do? He wanted to escape from Pakistan into some place where he can just sit down and probably seek asylum. He didn't have the luxury because he didn't have a powerful passport. He had a Pakistani passport. So there are only very handful of countries where you can go on that passport. I think you can either go to Nepal or Sri Lanka or some other countries. And that was his plan, that he'd fly there and then he'd apply for asylum. And he would go, and then he would hopefully be resettled in either in Australia or Canada or America or UK or some other good European country. That was his story, and I didn't know how to do it. I said, okay, let's set up GoFundMe page, and did that. I'd sent his story to many mainstream media outlets, and nobody wanted to touch it. And anyway, so thanks to the support of people, we did manage to raise just enough money that we could actually now send him. So he's in Nepal right now, where he might have to wait another 6-7 years before he's actually resettled either in Australia or anywhere. But probably not Australia. We are, as Zara said, we are lagging a bit behind on those issues. That's just one more story. So now you might have heard of Rahaf. Now you've heard of Spartacus, but there's so many people. How do we handle this? What do we do? And I'm generally an optimistic person, and I genuinely believe that there would be a point, it's very close to that tipping point, when something like this happen again and these governments will be forced to do something, their own governments. 2012 Gallup survey suggested we have 2% people in Pakistan that are convinced atheists, not just agnostics, not non-religious, confirmed atheists. 2%, yeah, you might think it's a very small number, but that translates to 4 million people. That's what is roughly the population of Victoria. It's bigger than the population of many European countries. Now that is a big number. What is happening with these people? Well, they are right now whinging and talking about their experiences on Facebook or social media. But that cannot sustain like that forever. And that number is going to constantly grow. This number was actually 1% in 2005. So in 7 years, it doubled. Let's hope it doubles again. And that is what we're trying to do, to actually encourage these people to say, okay, obviously you can't just all 4 million people from Pakistan alone can go somewhere else. I think Saudi Arabia has 5%, which translates something like 1.5 million or something. These numbers are growing, and these countries would have to do something about it. They have to acknowledge now that something is happening. When Rahaf's story happened, there was a hashtag on Twitter that was trending very aggressively, and there were thousands of tweets on that where women said, we're going to start leaving Saudi Arabia if these guardianship laws don't change. Where do these guardianship laws come from? One could interpret Quran differently, but there are interpretations that women are meant to be the secondary authorities in a household. And all of these people who actually say, okay, well, this has got, Saudi Arabia is barbaric, ISIS is barbaric, Taliban are barbaric, they've got nothing to do with Islam. Sure, someone said earlier that Islam can't be, it's a literal word of God. We know that, that is the claim. But within Quran, there's so many interpretations. You would find a beer-drinking Muslim, and then you would also find a Muslim who would aspire to blow himself up. Now, these are not obviously mutually exclusive things. I mean, as we know, some of the terrorists in France, and even the American ones, that they were happy to go to strip bars and still blow themselves up the next day. So all of these kind of things happen, but the interpretations are there, and that's why I slightly differ with Armin, and I hope we'll get to speak in Q&A about that. But I'm just hoping and expecting this tipping point to be reached. And yes, it's happening a lot in the underworld, as I said. If you want to call the intellectual dark web, it's happening a lot, and it's only a matter of time when these mainstream medias are going to start picking it up. My only problem with our own atheist community. We don't like the word community because, as Armin said, we don't want to be acting like the church, or we don't want to be saying, okay, we have our gathering as well. It's just one of those things. We just don't want to do it. People don't want to do it. But my grievance is, for example, in an event like this, we had so many people who showed interest initially, and then they decided to not show up because they were concerned about the security. They thought that there might be a security threat. I think John did tell a lot of them that no, there's no likelihood of that happening. I think there's a bigotry of low expectation as well, not only just from atheists, but also from the mainstream media as well. Okay, we know if we say something to these people, they're going to get upset, so we're not going to talk about this. Let them handle it. Fine, if you're too white to talk about Islam, okay, don't do it. But at least don't stop those who are trying to do it. That's all what we're doing. And yes, it is a brown man's problem. And brown men and women are actually trying to do something about it. So don't stop them, and just let's be a part of it. Let's just have conversation. And I think it's also a moment of self-reflection for those Muslims as well. Do Muslims really want to be seen as these people who are that the non-Muslims fear them, that they're threatened by them? Muslims would love to tell you, and to some extent, to their extent, it is kind of true that when they say that ISIS or Taliban or they've got nothing to do with Islam, they want to say that. Then this is the moment for them to demonstrate that okay, we don't agree with your atheism, we don't agree with your criticism of our religion, but fine, it's okay. But there's a fear in the mainstream liberal or the mainstream media that okay, we talk about this, that's going to offend those Muslims. I was actually watching a very interesting clip when Charlie Hebdo happened and the attack happened, and it involved Christopher Hitchens. Obviously, it's a long story, long time ago that thing happened, where the CNN woman said that the anchor woman said, well, we should respect Muslims about the beliefs, and that's why we're not showing the cartoons of Muhammad on our screens. And Hitchens, as witty as he said, well, you're not showing it out of respect, you're actually showing it out of fear. Because you know that if you showed it, your CNN journalist somewhere might get killed, or your office might get attacked. And the host actually said, yeah, we are a little bit worried about that too. That's why we didn't show it. So is this the reputation that Muslims want to hold? I'm sure there would be so many who would not want to hold that reputation. They would want people to think, okay, we are civilized enough, just like anyone else. You want to criticize us, we'll give you an answer, and we'll go with that. Are we doing for time? Plenty? Should we take some questions if anyone has a question? Yes?
Yeah, I was just going to say, what I'm hearing is a little bit simple-minded, really. There's a lot more to be explored here. I mean, it's a question of spiritual freedom. Like what I was getting from the two previous speakers was their anger. Destroy Islam. Well, if you start telling Islam that our path for our spiritual freedom consists in destroying Islam, aren't you sort of making things more difficult for yourselves?
To be honest, I really don't understand what spiritual is. Well, what is it? Can anyone explain to me what spirituality is?
Spiritual means the mind. We have mind's body. Well, the ancients would separate the mind itself into two parts and say there's a more spiritual aspect to the body.
Yeah, what is that spiritual aspect? Well, I know consciousness.
The mind is, for example, the one that would dabble in scientific thoughts. And then there's what they term the lower mind, which is more concerned with satisfying the body. Now, it's just
There's no scientific evidence for that. You know that. It's consciousness. That's all there is. There's consciousness. We're aware of our surrounding around it. That's it.
now you've been a little bit simple, but that is a perspective.
Well,
There's a perspective they had in ancient times that, yes, there is a body, there is a mind, and we can divide the mind into two parts. There's a mind which is more animal, and there is a mind which is more sophisticated. That's just a perspective.
yeah, but look, these are all different philosophies that people aspire to, but it's not really anything scientific about that. People.
You believe you don't have to deal with the complexities. We can just toss the complexities aside. It's all simple. We'll all just walk out the door and we'll be in heaven.
It's not simple at all. The universe is very complicated. We try to understand. But it's got nothing to do with the spirituality definition that you're throwing in. No one has ever been able to define spirituality. People say that, okay, we are feeling this transcendent feeling when you listen to this nice music, or when you listen to poetry. Yeah, I'm feeling something. There's this tingling feeling down my spine. That is something. What we have come to understand is that is all conscious. That's just consciousness, and there's activity going on in our brain. That is just telling what it is, how we're feeling. The spiritual aspect, the unknown, has often been credited to spiritual aspect, and that's what a lot of Hindu, the Buddhism, for example, they're massive on that. But no one has ever been able to explain what spirituality is. Are you just talking about okay? Well, I get the part where a lot of people say maybe we have a God gene in us, that we want to believe in a God. We just have that something in us that we want to believe that, you know, there's a big daddy up there waiting for us. Everything's going to be fine. He's just going to hold us in our arms and he's going to welcome us to the heaven. But people still can't reconcile with the fact that there is hell as well by the same big daddy. So okay, so you want to pick a different religion now, the religion where there's only heaven and there's no hell. Where's the fun in that? I mean, then okay, if we're all going to go to heaven, fine, okay, then let me go and do whatever I want to do. So it's obviously we have to build our society around certain principles, around certain laws, and those laws evolve, those philosophies evolve, and that is a product of it. We have a 10,000-year history where we have gone, and we have gone because of that journey, and that journey is going to keep changing. Now, I often wonder what's going to happen, you know, in 100 years' time. That what those people are going to look back at us.
I'm just noticing your position is that if
I'm an atheist, I think.
If I cannot define it, it cannot exist.
No, okay. So there has to be something there must be. I'm not saying that I'm the smartest guy, or I don't think that you would call yourself that either.
I'm saying something I don't know about doesn't exist.
Well, there's no evidence for something. Okay, sorry. Let's go to a question.
So I guess related to that, and more related to the question that I asked Armin before. I guess relating to that whole sense that there might be something missing, especially if you come from that spiritual background. Not that I am spiritual myself, but do you think there is kind of a space for atheist communities to move more towards, I guess, having not a spiritual kind of ethos, but more, I guess, having an ethos at all, having archetypes, having a path that is typical, and having shared values that are sort of more structured than the current.
Yeah, but whatever that's going to happen, it's still going to happen with the human intellect and human mind, and whatever the people agree, argue upon, and then they come to something. And I was just about to give an example that, okay, well, what are the people 100 years from today? They're going to look back at us, and each and every one of us would be judged by them, and they would think that we were some barbarian people. Just the same way we look at 200 years ago, and we say, okay, you used to own a human being, and you used to whip them, or you used to think that this is your property. So what are these people going to look at? That I can think of just one example, but they might come up with 100 other examples. They would think, okay, these guys were barbarian because they used to torture animals and they used to eat them. And vegans might be a little bit ahead of us in that sense, and the morality would have evolved by that point. And morality is always evolving. And now you want to call that some spiritual being told someone that, okay, we shouldn't eat animals? Sure, call it. But as I said, there's no evidence for that. It's not supported by science. And once there's a burden of proof, someone who wants to make a claim that a brain works a certain way, then go prove it in a lab, and we'll all get it. How are we doing that? Sorry? Oh, good. Okay, question. Yes.
Harris, you noticed how atheism is growing quickly in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and it seems to me that it's growing quicker than so-called reformed Islam.
Yes.
Do you think that is indicative of the people that it's growing among? It's not just a desire for freedom and a free life that's driving them to believe and do what they do. It's also a desire for knowledge and intellectual curiosity. Is that where?
Yeah. But we could put ourselves in a box as well. Like, I mean, for example, the 2 million followers on Atheist Republic. We might think, okay, all of these had the same passion. They wanted to understand what religion is. What the hell have we been killing each other for the last 4,000 years or whatever? So we might think, okay, well, there is a growing urge to debunk religion and actually find what's happening with religion. But, 2 million is still very small compared to 8 billion. So we don't know. There's so many other people who just don't think about it at all. They just don't care about it. And they grow up with a certain thing. And I think, I personally think there's more reform happening than actually apostasy happening. This is probably why Armin hates reform so much, because he wants to skip the middleman. He wants to skip the middleman. He wants to go straight to atheism. But there are people who are doing a really good job in doing that, because they are actually reinterpreting Quran. They're actually modifying Islam. And the biggest example of reform of Islam is no Muslim country, and except for ISIS, which is a territory, it's not even a recognized country, except for ISIS, even Taliban did not endorse slavery. So Islam has, okay, albeit I'll give you that, it was forced by the Western civilization to, okay, Saudi Arabia and Yemen, I think, were the last two countries to abolish slavery. And they did it eventually. We'll do that after the conference. They did it eventually, but they did it, right? So there's apart from ISIS infected people, you would actually not find many people who would say, yeah, you know what, bring back slavery. I want to own 3 sex slaves, or, it just doesn't happen anymore. And that is the Reformation. And now, what is happening? I found the other day I was reading of a gay imam. I mean, he's not just a gay Muslim. He's actually he's an imam. There are people behind him actually praying, and they know that, okay, well, he's public. I'm assuming they would know that he's gay, and there are women coming out. They say, okay, I don't know if it was true or not, but there was a Muslim woman who was saying, would it be halal if I become a stripper? But I'm assuming there might be some Muslim strippers there too, women. But they would call themselves, I'm a woman, right? So forget about hijab. There could be strippers out there. So I think reform is happening as well. I intellectually I don't agree with that. I'm not like that. Okay, well, if I look at it this way, that if I can understand, I'm not very intelligent. If I can understand, so can anyone. And
I have a question.
Yeah. Okay. Go.
But are you talking about reforming Islam, or are you talking about reforming Muslims?
Well, it's not like they're mutually exclusive. So when God, what did they say? What's the saying goes? That God created man in His image, and a lot of other people say, well, no, it's actually man created God in His image. It's the same way. Islam is what a Muslim thinks Islam is.
Right, one informs the other, but is not the other.
Well, no, but in their mind, that's all that matters. That's all what they're concerned about. That they think that, okay, this is what Islam. Our prophet was the greatest prophet. Was the best example. He loved children, and they want to ignore the other loving aspects that he had for children. But that's just how people create their vision, and that's what it matters to Islam. Why do people say, ISIS has got nothing to do with Islam? Well, ISIS is the closest form of truest Muhammad's Islam that we can get. But a lot of Muslims don't agree with that. So you could say that Muslims are reforming, but no, in their mind, Islam has reformed as well. Yeah.
Can I propose a really good way forward in terms of like the last 10 years or so? I think the internet blowing up has allowed everyone to connect, especially for ex-Muslims in the Middle East, because they're able to now find groups. I was in a Facebook group. It had like 80,000 people in it, and they were all atheists. It was Arabic. I couldn't understand it. But, I had friends who were telling me about it. And I think that the censorship, now seeing people being taken offline for Islamophobia and different things, and looking at how those like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, are being what's the word when they stop them?
Yeah, blocked them.
Censoring going on.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who's a journalist who was actually sacked for being more outspoken about issues relating to leaving Islam and being against Islam and what have you. And so now she works freelance, but she messaged me the other day about the woman who was in Thailand, and she said we have to get onto this and put some positive things because the Islamists are already on Twitter, and the guy that she knows, the journalist who interviewed an ex-Muslim woman on, I think it was ABC 24 News, she knows that journalist, and she said he's gone out on a limb against the powers that be in the ABC to interview that woman, and we need to really back him now. We really need to say positive things on social media, so on the Facebook feed and on their Twitter feed, because the Islamist response is going to confirm the ABC executive to say, we've got to shut this down, we can't have this free speech anymore. So the fact that the social media has allowed more ex-Muslims to connect in the Middle East, we have to really look at in Pakistan, in these places that it's not shut down, like in China, for example.
What?
We just heard what the ABC is for anyone who isn't Australian here.
Sorry, say it again.
Can you say what the ABC is for anyone who isn't Australian here?
No, I actually wasn't aware of that. No.
No, the ABC, I mean, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which is the government funded.
Yeah.
In Australia.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're trying to do. But again, it's not just all hunky dory with Facebook. As Armin said, that I have to create a new Facebook profile every 7 or 8 days or so. And Twitter apparently is just as bad. But I don't know. Twitter loves me for some reason. They haven't banned me yet, but I'm assuming it's going to happen at some point. So we're facing another battle on that front. So it's not only just the mainstream media that doesn't want to have anything to do with us, but it would actually be social media as well. But it's just a matter of time. How I would actually want to know about this journalist. I mean, if she, that's pretty brave of her to actually do that and actually risk a job over it. Right? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
So next up we have Sabeena Mozzafar, a Pakistani ex-Muslim atheist.
As someone rightly noticed over there, a lot of us are quite angry about the topic. And before I begin, I would like to say that I also went through that particular phase when I first left Islam when I was 21 years old. Though I felt this relief that I finally had come to know the truth at a relatively young age, I still felt that I had wasted 21 years of my life believing in a concept that was fraudulent, and I had no choice in what I believed. And that's why that's what motivated me to the core, that I wanted to speak out and make sure and start up conversations and make sure my voice is heard, so other people do know that people can leave Islam, because that's something that a lot of Muslims, particularly in the Middle East, they don't know that they have that option. They don't know that there is such a thing that you can leave Islam and then live your life as an atheist. My family, my social circle, my peers in the university, and random strangers on the street. As a vocal ex-Muslim, I have attempted to speak to all of the above about the topic of Islam. And this simple attempt to start up conversations has left me with some pretty memorable nicknames: a bigot, an Islamophobe, a disgrace to the family name, a whore, a sellout to the West, and an imposter. From the gay ex-Muslim who equated Islam to peace, love, and tolerance towards homosexuality, and solely blamed colonization for why the Middle East was anti-queer, to the female law student in Sydney who considered me bigoted and misinformed about Islam because I stated how it promoted violence against minority groups, to the ex-Muslim himself who equated criticisms of or mockery of Islam to anti-Muslim bigotry and believed Muslims to currently be the most persecuted minority in the Western world. It's pretty clear that how varied the responses on this topic are always directly linked back to two factors: their personal knowledge about Islam and their willingness to not let emotions override accepting objective fact as a reality. It's not as if I can't comprehend where their perspectives come from. The regressive leftists fear vilifying a minority group and contributing to their persecution, or the gay Muslims' desire to still belong to a religious community that is accepting of them, On most levels, it is even better to have Muslims who genuinely believe in LGBT rights, in religious freedom, and a secular government than the hardcore Islamists attempting to justify the mentality of ISIS. Yet it creates obstacles when attempting to criticize Islam objectively, because it contributes to leftist denial, and that Islam itself is the problem. It makes having these conversations all the more important. To state the obvious, most of these people from either extreme are adhering to a confirmation bias, a classic mindset I've seen time and again in Muslim communities. The more you tell them they're wrong, they will only consider it further proof that they're right. The more you present them with objective facts contradicting their pre-held beliefs, the more they will jump on the fake news bandwagon and succumb to the beliefs that there's some hidden agenda for why their quote-unquote righteous beliefs are being tarnished. From my experiences and the experiences of other ex-Muslims, much more vocal, much more well publicly known, a certain pattern does emerge that a lot of Muslims don't necessarily know a lot about their own religion. Instead, for the majority of Muslims, I'd say the only information that is ever factual is anything that portrays Islam in a positive light, showing it to be superior to all other religions or modes of thinking. It's no wonder why so many Muslims in the West think only culture is to blame for why 13 Muslim majority countries punish apostasy with death. How so many Muslims actually genuinely fell for the belief that Rahaf was a porn star who was never a true Muslim, not deserving asylum or any sympathy, or how such a large portion of Muslims in the Middle East and beyond believe Israel is responsible for 9/11, committing it as part of some mastermind plan to defame Islam, which is apparently the true global threat for world domination, at least according to some videos on the internet. I grew up in a relatively literate upper middle class household in Pakistan, but was exposed to such conspiracies from the age of, I'd say, 8 or 9. It is because in this reality, Islam and Muhammad are the innocent victims, not guilty of any wrongdoing. This quote-unquote systematic persecution of Islam is obvious evidence for these people that Islam is, in fact, the correct path. Initially, such a bias, personally, I assumed, was being held subconsciously, until I realized it was purposely being enforced by imams, scholars, and so-called academics of Islam, all to brainwash the vulnerable, at the mosques and even schools, integrated into the learning curriculum of primary school kids. Growing up in Pakistan, Muhammad's marriage to Aisha was already being taught and normalized to me in grade 3, as were the justifications behind Muhammad marrying his daughter-in-law and the military rape and kidnap of Safiya. Looking back at it now, he just seems like one horny man. But in schools, I was taught he was nothing but a noble figure compelled by God's command to do controversial things for the sole purpose of bettering humanity. They found some way to always justify the war and violence committed. But when Muslims took part in real-life violence, either the West, culture, or the Jews were at fault. They brainwashed people, particularly women, into their own oppression so early on, and subsequently brainwashed them into believing the supposed justified persecution of others. And how far can this brainwashing go in the Western world? I still remember the time I spoke to the female vice president of the UNSW Muslim Student Association at uni and asked her why a man should be entitled to having 4 wives. Her response was because men cheat more than women in relationships. She considered it an indication that a man should be considered incapable of controlling their sex drive and shouldn't be pressured to restrain it, whereas a woman has the God-given patience to tolerate her husband's other wives and overcome her feelings of jealousy. Yes, there I was speaking to a 20-year-old girl who had grown up in a community that, unlike her home country or religion, she was also from Pakistan, placed no restrictions on her because of her gender, and actually held men accountable for their actions, yet was still in the mindset that she wasn't even deserving of her own husband's loyalty. The fact is, she didn't reach these conclusions by herself. An imam did, in fact, teach that to her. I still remember in 2015, it was Islamic Awareness Week on campus, and I asked the Islamic scholar brought in by the uni MSA why men were allowed to have 4 wives. His response, well, your husband's going to cheat on you anyways. Would you rather it be with someone infested with diseases or someone you actually approve of? I think it's pretty obvious now why speaking to Islamic scholars in an attempt to regain my faith only made it worse. Ironically, that same girl later even attempted to quote unquote console me on the Islamic position of apostasy. Yes, in an Islamic state, you would be killed, but in any other nation, Muslims are required to oblige to the law. Therefore, you needn't fear for your safety. I'm sure even the regressive feminists today wouldn't be so silent on these kinds of mindsets being promoted in society if the person saying them was a white Christian, not a brown Muslim, or the topic at hand was rape and not murder. Oh yes, in accordance to my beliefs, it would be completely legal and justified to rape you, and I'd totally do it, but don't worry for your safety because my beliefs require me to follow the law here. I think it may also come as less of a surprise now, as Zara had previously mentioned, that the Muslim Student Association at UNSW and several other universities in Australia are heavily associated with the Islamic extremist organization Hizb ut-Tahrir. But that's a conversation for another time. Thank you. Yeah. You have any questions? Yeah.
I think that one thing that some people might be surprised to learn is that a lot of what has been said here today may very well be, unfortunately, illegal under a silly law we have in Victoria called the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act. It sounds innocuous, but it is actually can operate as a de facto blasphemy law. But if you say that you're against laws that have that kind of name, you come across as, in some people's eyes, as being against racial and religious tolerance. So what tips do you have to try to promote free speech? Because I think that was a really excellent speech that is especially vulnerable to that kind of legislation.
My first thing is that I would seriously read certain parts of my speech over to them and just openly say that you're tolerating intolerance. And that makes the law itself hypocritical. You're doing this to protect people's rights, but are actually persecuting other people. So the law is inadequate in itself. Definitely. Yes?
Can I ask you whether most Muslims are aware of some other sort of unpleasant aspects of Muhammad's biography, most of them in the Hadiths? Like, for example, him ordering the murder of the 4 critical poets, or beheading, and personally, young boys as young as 8 after the Battle of the Trench, or personally overseeing the torture and murder of one of the Jewish chiefs of Medina. Are they aware of all these things, or do they just follow their faith on what's told to them by the imams and others?
I'd say since I did my schooling in Pakistan till O levels, which is the Australian equivalent of HSC, over there everything that is taught to them is taught in such a way that it's always justified. I do recall remembering a lot, so I did study Islamic studies. I do know the situations that you're talking about, but it was always justified. I reached the conclusions that these were not appropriate and these were not always justified killings after my own critical analysis. A lot of people just succumb to the brainwashing. It's kind of like that personality type, which I realize is that when you're force-fed an ideology and like live a very controlling lifestyle, particularly as a woman living under Islam, many people either succumb to that eventually, other people just begin to rebel, and I was one of the few that managed to rebel and was successful. So, yes?
In relation to that, I think a lot of them actually are aware of the contents of the Quran, especially if you look at, for example, in the madrasas, where they study and learn to even recite the Quran, and there are especially schools, they call them schools, for women, where all they do is learn the Quran. So you think that a lot of them would be aware of all of the content. Do you think that's then backed up by teaching by the imams in their society to kind of explain it away in a positive manner or an acceptable manner?
Yes, it's basically you can just say one fact that a murder happened. There's no backstory provided to it. It can be a murder done in self-defense or for the wrong purposes or for theft. It's always, they have a particular agenda in mind in these madrasas, in Islamic schools, that they're going to taught it in a way that these people are not going to be doubting their faith, but be made even stronger believers. They're going to also be very anti-science as well. Yes?
We had the Radic inquiry into religious freedom. I'm just wondering how many in the local community wrote about privilege and freedom or something. If that, that inquiry that we had about a year ago or 2 years ago. So I know I wrote something, but I don't Australia wrote about putting the applications in regard to that?
Statistically, I do not think that I would be the most aware on that. Especially since 2 years ago, I was heavily more closeted than I am today. I think that's, yeah.
Thanks, Sabeena. Next up we have Ishma Alvi, an ex-Muslim atheist and psychologist.
Thank you. I'm going to reverse engineer my story a little bit and start from now. I feel like I just keep on shedding layers of my identity that I put on me. So I think in the past 5 years, I just keep coming out. So I've come out as divorced to my family, which they didn't know. Then I came out as queer, which a lot of people didn't know. Then I came out as ex-Muslim, which was forced on me. I didn't want to come out. I was made to come out. Thank you, Daily Mail. And each time it forces me to realize how much silencing there is. And the silencing is subtle and complex. So the silencing around divorce is cultural and religious. One informs the other. Where I come from, I'm from Pakistan. The silencing around being queer is not just in Pakistan, it's global. It's just on a spectrum of silencing and a spectrum of gagging and rights. So I don't think we have a utopia where queer rights are absolute, fundamental, and equitable. And then you come to gagging around declaring your freedom from religion. And the questions I receive regarding that are from as benign as, why ex-Muslim? Why not just not Muslim? And that's benign, I think, relative to some of the other questions and comments I've received. But it's a really good question, ex-Muslim, and not just not anymore practicing Muslim, because it has to be a clear, definitive leaving off. I haven't just drifted, it is conscious, it's not a whim. So that's why it's really, really important. But other questions I have had is your attention seeking. That's how you got your citizenship. You, because of your money, citizenship, people thought I was seeking asylum in Australia, and that's why. So there were a lot of questions I got. But what I really got a lot of was gagging from everywhere. So I'd like to say, oh yeah, the Muslims gagged me. Of course they did. I knew they would. My family were, and I come from a very progressive family, from global standards, not just Pakistani standards. But the gagging didn't just come from the Muslim community. The gagging came from everywhere. And that's what made me really, really vigilant about where I got support from, because it was really, really front-loaded. So the left, as people before me, people much more aware and much more active in this area have said, there is very, very little support for the ex-Muslim community, and that makes them extremely vulnerable. They're not supported by their own because they have abandoned their own community. They are not supported by the left. The liberal left will not support them because they're frightened. They're frightened of being seen as bigoted, as racist, as exclusive. They're frightened that they will be seen as prejudiced, so they won't come out and support, and it's scary for them. It's also scary because it goes directly against their very reactive mandate of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the right hate Muslims, so we will love them, which is very, very reactive and unnuanced, but it seems to be guiding a lot of the blanketing embrace of the Muslim community. But what is really frightening is the people who did come out and support were the right. And I'd love to say, oh, the kind, generous right. No, it was completely agenda-driven. Andrew Bolt came out in support of me and patted me on the head and said, oh, good girl. No. As someone who is a very active feminist, a radical active feminist, I have to be very, very careful of where my support comes from and think twice before accepting it. So I would love to say, for example, as a feminist, when Gillette came out with that ad about which was in line with the hashtag Me Too movement, I would have loved to come out and say, oh, that's fantastic, yay. No, I have to think twice. It's coming from an agenda-driven capitalist space. Accepting their support now, does that put me in some kind of vulnerable debt position later on? Because nothing comes for free. And the same way, accepting support from the right, accepting support from anyone with an agenda has to make you think twice as an ex-Muslim, which makes it even more vital for vulnerable ex-Muslims who are coming out from spaces where information is restricted, where censorship laws are tight, them coming out, they'll come out and think my natural support would be the left, because that's my natural support in my own country. And they're naive and uninformed because that's the spaces they're coming from. And they will come out and find, oh, the left doesn't want to touch them. The left is scared by them. They confuse them. And the right comes out in support, and they are vulnerable to that, which is all the more reason for ex-Muslims to be given platform by the left, platform by their own. And I would count myself as left, but I know no one from the left came out in support of me when I was forced to come out as an ex-Muslim. But coming back to me, I am from Pakistan. I'm from a very, very moderate upper middle class family. My family is very LGBTQI tolerant. Religion wasn't even in the foreground when I was growing up. As a child, it was background noise. The call to prayer would ring out 5 times a day and we'd hear it and get on with our lives. I'd see my grandmother praying somewhere in the distance, and it was not made forefront. Because I lived in a very rarefied, complex space of privilege where religion was optional, and how much of it I wanted was a choice. My first privilege was the financial privilege of being in the upper middle class. The second privilege was a cultural privilege. My family is from that upper middle class background, and therefore we have embraced a lot of Western ritual, language, dress. And in a country that has been so heavily colonized for such a long period of time, that is a key class indicator, and it accords privilege. And then another reason that I was privileged was my family is very, very intellectual. So by the age of 15, I had already identified myself as agnostic. And by 17, I was atheist, having read the other religions. So it wasn't just me rejecting Islam and therefore rejecting theism. I read the Quran and I thought, So I read the Bible and I was like, oh, I see a theme here. Then I read and attended classes on Hinduism, and I was just like, yeah, no, I'm seeing something here. And what I was seeing was that as a woman, I can't have a religion, because so far, every faith, whether it calls itself a faith or not, Hinduism, Buddhism, all of them have a thick vein of misogyny baked right through it. So I had to either love myself or be religious. So I decided I like me more. And which is what made me an atheist. Actively leaving Islam in a conscious way and taking on the title came on later when I was asked to contribute to a book on the experience of Muslims and ex-Muslims in Australia. And in that examination, it allowed me to see my relation with Islam and how abusive it actually was. And maybe I had the privilege to be not directly experience the abuse as some from a more restrictive background might, but so it may not have been lived experience all the time. I wasn't forced to wear hijab. I chose to wear it. And I didn't choose to wear it for spiritual reasons. I chose to wear it because it was practical. I didn't own traditional clothing. I didn't want to buy traditional clothing. So when I went out in public, I wore a big abaya over my jeans and nothing on underneath. And that's how I got on public transport in Pakistan. It kept me safe when I was going to university there. Nobody bothered me. I wore the veil. So I wore it for practical reasons. And the fact that I could only be respected when I hid what I was, when I made myself smaller, made me realize that this is abusive. Islam is emotionally blackmailing. It tells a woman there's heaven under your feet, which is an eternal sop thrown at the feet of every woman. There's heaven under your feet. Here, have some. This rhetorical heaven that we're all treading on if we happen to have female genitalia. That sop is emotional blackmail. Every religion has its version. That's Islam's version of blackmail for women. So they feel happy to stay at home, and they feel guilty about wanting to leave. It's abusive because it halves you. It literally halves you. Islam says you are half a man in the court of law. We need two of you because if one is wrong, the other can correct her, because men are never wrong. Islam likes you small and quiet if you're a woman, and I'm neither. So I'm not a Muslim, and I'm an atheist. And that is me.
The way we learned it was that heaven is under the feet of mothers, not women. So
Yes, mothers.
But
Yeah.
then it's not enough. You have to actually be a mom
To get divinity.
Yeah, so that's also. Do you see that as also suggesting that for you to be complete as a woman, you have to be a mother?
Oh yes, absolutely. Especially in Islam, to be accorded any respect, you have to belong to someone.
Right.
So you have to be married,
Right.
and you have to reproduce. Yeah. Yes.
Firstly, I just want to say thank you to the Secular Party of Australia for bringing everyone together, and also thank all the speakers for their extraordinary stories. I think you're all extremely brave and amazing. I just want to say that firstly. My question is, if you're going through, you've probably all had that moment where you made that decision to quote come out or go on that process. What is that process? Obviously, it is a process, a journey, and you don't just wake up one day and go, right, that's it, I'm going to get on Twitter and all that stuff. What advice would you give people who are sharing their stories in anonymity? How does one go through that process?
The process? That's a really good question. And that's the first personalized humanistic question. Thank you for that. It is a complex process. Obviously, it's very, very individualistic, but as an individual who experienced it and as a psychologist, which is my day job, it is a process that can be uniquely isolating and extremely frightening, because there are many, many threats involved, some internal, some from the family, and some very real external threats. I had to change my identity on social media because my family were getting threats back home. So they're quite frightened, and Pakistan is not the safest place for an ex-Muslim. What needs to be done, depending on the severity, is support. Go online and just search, inform yourself, see what support groups are out there. There are meetups available, there are underground communities available, there are all the communities represented by our wonderful speakers here available. That's one thing. Seek psychological support. I would strongly recommend that. Now, that's not just me drumming up business. That is genuinely what I would recommend, because it is very, very complicated. I'm still unpacking some of the bad magics done to my brain by growing up wrapped around by Islam or religion, any religion. So, yes.
And what about your family? Like, that obviously is a very personal process as well, because all of the speakers have talked about that tension. Such a hard thing in a family. Does that take time? Does it ever?
Any disruption to an identity of a family member. So human beings like in-grouping. They feel safe in an in-group, and your family is your in-group. And when you change form, whether it's a child who is transitioning gender or an adult transitioning religion or belief, you change your identity and you become the unknown, and you become something frightening to your own family. And often there's guilt in the family where they feel, what have we done wrong to make you do this? It's almost as if they feel your choices are weaponized against their parenting. So it can do. I'd love to say always, but I have lots of cases
where that doesn't happen, where they have lost family members permanently.
As a psychologist, have you had any sort of conflict with other psychologists of people, or have you witnessed in the field of psychology this kind of movement that, I don't know, I personally have seen kind of a movement for Muslims in the mental health area as they become more aware of it, as they become more aware of the issues with depression and things like that. They start to try to inject some of the religiosity into it, and to me it's kind of disconcerting because they're the same things like, I don't know if you're aware that they have like forums. Recently, I found in this psychologist and and they went to this forum where one of the things they talked about was how to tell the difference between someone who is mentally ill and someone who is possessed by the devil. And it basically broke down to you have to get it.
That was actually a topic of discussion in a psychological conference in Pakistan. Not possession and all that, but just about whether to what degree do we make psychology secular? And it of a necessity has to be. It has to be a moral, judgment, religion-free space. But speaking to the question you just asked, unfortunately, because that demographic of Muslim women who are ex is so small that I very rarely, I think I've only met 3 in my 15 plus years as a psychologist and worked with only 3 clients who have gone through that process. So I can't speak to that, but I imagine it would be a very, very large movement. From the Pakistani context, yes, it is something that is being considered by the mental health community there.
So I was talking more in Australia, like I found in this for example, Push, there's like this, and I don't know there's the name one Hanan Do, but she's pretty public, and she was involved in conversion therapy.
Yes.
Some of my close Muslim friends were gay. I'm not gonna mention, but their parents forced them to go to gay conversion.
Which has now been banned.
But it's still happening.
Yeah, well, it's becoming illegal, and now you can. APRA is coming. Yes, and it's going to affect registration. So conversion therapy is going to be taken off as anything acceptable by APRA, which is the registration board and the APS. But yes, there is no absolute way of controlling every professional out there. There isn't. You'll have quack doctors, you'll have quack psychologists, you will have people who bring the personal into the professional and cause extreme damage to the people they're working with, which is why we have governing bodies. So you'd use a reporting pathway to address that. But in terms of the psychological community, I thus far have not had any direct experience about how religion informs therapy. And maybe that's also just the circles I move in.
Yeah, I think it's because a lot of the time, like, I know my family members, they're very good at this double speak. Like, with certain people, they'll know exactly what to say, and then with other crowds, they'll say what they truly believe.
Yes,
Safety. With how they treat their patients, sometimes, I guess, I know family members who they despise their patients because they're gay, because.
Sorry, yeah, the time is up. I have to go. But thank you so much.
And we might continue that one later. We're just going to stop for a short break, so refreshments are available just outside. And if we can all come back for about 3:15 for a 3:20 start. So we can have some questions in this time. I might start though. So if I open up to the panel, is it more difficult for women to leave the Islamic faith as opposed to men?
I think it is more difficult for women to do anything, and that includes leaving the Islamic faith.
Did anyone want to add to anything, or
Question or add it?
question, or add to the comments?
Why do you think it's like, just like at the ex-Muslims that are speaking today, there's like 4 of you and 2 men, and also it seems like the ex-Muslim movement in general has a lot of not just female activists, but also a lot of the women that leave Islam seem to be taking leading position in the fight that we're doing. What do you think? What's the cause of that? Like,
So that's a really good question. And what you have touched upon is the women who leave Islam and then become visible. That's a certain type of woman, but it's not a representative of the average woman who is struggling under Islam, whether it's in the Saudi guardianship or in Iran. That those women are the average. And I'm not saying average in a derogatory or demeaning way. I'm saying those are the women who are really struggling. The women who come out and have the light shone on them and are highlighted and take activist positions, they are the privileged few and not representative of the average. And that privilege can come from an intellectual space, the opportunity to grow intellectually, the opportunity to tap into a space of psychological strength and support that others may not have. So that doesn't mean that it's easier for women to leave and then and progress to a higher standing in activism and visibility. But the women who do it are women who have had a special place to be allowed to do it, whether internally or externally. At least that's what I believe.
I also think that when women do leave Islam, they have to come out bolder and stronger because of how much misogyny we've been facing while being in religion. So when you come out, you're at this stage where like, I'm free, I need to represent, I need to represent that freedom versus men who've come out. Like one, we've had to wear hijab. We've always had unequal rights. And, when we come out, we want to be bolder. We want to come out. So those who do speak out always have this assertiveness, borderlining aggression, like, we're bold. Muslim men or men in general have always seen Muslim women to be second-class citizens. So when we do come out, we're like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to come out bolder, stronger, and also to help other women, because there are generally, I think we agreed on before, that there are less women who come out, and those that do, that the ones who are out, we represent that boldness to encourage more women to come out. So I think that's why.
I agree completely. It's to compensate. So we have to be tougher. We have to come out stronger. We have to come out harder, which is why we call angry women. We're not angry. This is where we should be and where we have to be. But yes, our loud voices are to lend loud voices to other women.
I also like it when we, as compared to our male counterparts, activists, when we pose a bold question or a bold statement, sometimes I get in responses, why are you so defensive? Why are you so aggressive? And I'm like, had a man said the same thing that I did, I would never have to be in a defensive position. Like I would never have been a stance that would be considered as defensive or aggressive. I think overall misogyny and sexism, regardless of the Islamic world, exists even in the Western world, and it's not only enforced by men, it's also enabled by women. There are women who have also struggled. Is there?
I think the other thing you might point out is ex-Muslim women have already risked everything. Why not risk some more?
Yeah.
We've pissed our families off. We've pissed our communities off. Why not just go all the way and just keep going?
We've angered all the Muslim men by coming out.
Just to elaborate also on the Annie's question, it's the fact that Muslim women in Muslim majority countries are definitely not given the same liberties men are. A Muslim man, even in Pakistan, can go and drink, go and have sex, but a Muslim woman can't because the family honor is on her shoulders. So to pass those standards, a Muslim man necessarily would disappoint his parents by leaving Islam, but not to the same extent that a Muslim woman would.
It's just the burden on a Muslim woman is just far, far greater because we don't just carry the need to support a family. We carry the honor of every man, the father, the brother, the husband. Every man's honor is on our shoulders.
So you would say that honor culture persists more with women as opposed to men?
Of course.
Yeah,
Islam
definitely.
perpetuates that. Islam perpetuates that honor culture.
I love Armin's reaction right now. He's like, all this where's the women?
Obviously, I want to touch upon the Sharia, which I again appreciate it's difficult time limit, but a lot of the stuff you're saying actually is sort of Sharia based. I'm not particularly familiar with Australia because in the UK there's been a big drive, and you had the previous Archbishop, Mr. Rowan Atkinson, who actually endorsed Sharia, which is making life
very
miserable
difficult
for the average Brit or the Aussie. Is there any push or drive to expose implementation of Sharia
So,
in the Muslim communities and such like that? One can go on, but you know what I'm saying.
what protects Australia from that? And here I'm going to say something that's going to offend a lot of Australians, but I'm Australian, so I can say it. What protects Australia from that kind of Shariaization is Australia's xenophobia. Australia has the luck and the misfortune of being an island nation. So we are years behind that level of acceptance. Our immigration policies will reflect that, and our multicultural policies will reflect that as well. So that Shariaization is not necessarily a legislative threat, but it is a social threat. So the ABC did a story, I think a couple of months ago, about domestic violence in certain areas in New South Wales, lower socioeconomic demographics, and these were Muslim communities, and women were beaten up at home. But the support services, social work, police were all eggshelling around the issue because they cited religious freedom. And they said, the Quran lets me, you're stepping on my religious rights by interfering in this very religious and personal matter. So it's not touching legislature yet, and I think we're safely years away from that right now. But it is on a much more grassroots level.
Very quickly, I would like to really stress to you as well, please, that you must make every effort not to go down this two-tier law system, which I think I want to elaborate in the UK. Bearing in mind, UK is an island nation as well.
Yes.
So,
but it has the neighboring influences of not just, it's the UK, which includes and has until recently Europe as well. So it has the Europe influence. Australia, aside from the small island states and the Pacific Islanders, is it's a law unto itself. It reigns this area.
So I should definitely be here then.
Good luck with immigration.
You're in a better place because I'm swapping places now.
We do have Sharia courts in Australia, though. They are constant here. Muslims will choose to go to them because the Muslim community in Australia is so insular. They do not like anyone else from outside. So when a woman wants to divorce her husband, she's not going to go through the court system first. She will go through the Sharia courts in Australia. It's a full Islamic council that operates in here. So there is kind of this thing where it's an issue, and there has been some cases, I can't remember exact facts, but there have been cases where a woman has gone through the Sharia court system to get her children. She was, I guess, in Islamic law, she doesn't get custody of her children. She then tried to go through the correct avenue of the justice system in Australia, and she was not able to based on the religious findings of that case. So it is somewhat happening in Australia, but again, what Ishma said, because we are a very isolated country, I think there's a bit more of a control in that regards.
Do you feel though it's growing?
Part of this multiculturalism that was spoken about that can have an impact, both positive and negative?
Yeah. Well, I haven't been involved, obviously, in the Muslim community because, but when I was involved in the Muslim community, Sharia courts are a very common thing. Very, very common thing. Because the other thing as well is that stigma with, especially particularly Muslim women. If you go to a court or if you go to anyone outside of the Muslim community, you're seeing as bringing dishonor not just on your family or your husband, or you're bringing dishonor on the entire Muslim community, and you're showing the world Islam's dirty secrets. So I think it is there, but so long as more Muslim women are aware that they can seek, and ex-Muslim women can seek justice outside of the Islamic world, and that that stigma is gone from it, then Sharia won't be able to.
So do you think it's incumbent on us as ex-Muslim women who are activists in the area, especially, I mean, I'm new, but you guys are long-standing activists, to create accessible information pathways saying, if you feel this, access this mental health service, access this legal service, access this court, you have the right to go here, to go there, the police will guide you here, the social services will guide you here, and here's your mental health support.
And this is why I asked you, can I refer more women to you? Because what happens is when they come to me and they're like, where should I go? Because Faithless Hijabi is global, right? But I have all these women coming to me, and I cannot provide that mental health support that a professional can. Or, you know, what I mentioned is Australia is clearly not doing as much. And what Faith to Faithless does in the UK is something that we need in Australia. It's something that I'm trying to do with Faithless Hijabi, talk to social services here. There's so many ex-Muslims who work in, you know, social services, but they haven't been voicing their opinions. It's something that we need to come out as ex-Muslims bolder, educate people, educate police on how to handle that abuse that comes with
Mhm.
communities, or that, you know, the wife beating that comes with it. Like, what do? Are you going to send them back to the husband where they can justify that the wife beating is from the Quran? Or put them in a safe place, right? Are you going to
Exactly.
give them that one warning that, hey, it's not going to happen again because, you know, this guy is clearly like just had a mental breakdown? No, this guy may have had a mental breakdown, but it is also because his religion has enabled him. So, you know, we don't have those services yet in Australia, as ex-Muslims and everybody here, we should be enforcing it. Every contact that you have, our voices, send them the recording of this. Let them know that there are people that are looking, or they're willing to help you help every other ex-Muslim.
And the information, I think, and please advise me, works both ways, because we have to inform the professionals out there who know nothing of this community. This is how you sensitively handle
Exactly.
this.
Yes.
This is the language. Those are the pathways. This is the engagement. Don't use that language. Do use this language. I
Yeah.
think that it needs to be bookended.
Yeah. Yes.
With the vulnerable ex-Muslims in the middle.
Yeah. I mean,
Especially the women, particularly because women reporting. Anyway, particularly DV is very, very low, regardless of religious background. And Australia has, I'm sorry, I'm really offending a lot of Australians, but I promise I am Australian. Australia has one of the highest rates of domestic violence of the Caucasian world.
I'm just going to add in with the whole offense thing.
Highest reported.
I'm just going to
Of the Caucasian.
I'm just going to do it. Just going to clarify the offense thing. I'm sure everybody has the right to be offended, but we should be talking about this problem regardless of who has the right to be offended. This is how we tackle issues. This is how we create change when we talk about it, even if it offends people. Us talking about Islam is obviously offensive to people, but that should not stop us. Right? Us talking about Christianity, us talking about religion in general, offends people. Even about spirituality, offends people. But that, if that is a problem that needs addressing, we need to be talking regardless of how people feel, because that is the only way we're going to make change. Wilson, sorry, you've been.
My concern really is, it's wonderful to say you've got some data, but even when we're writing reports to the UK government for whichever inquiry is being undertaken, the response that always comes back to us is your data is insufficient. How will you address that so that you can then bring in these recommendations that you're requesting? Because almost ubiquitously, most of these concerns are going to be thrown to the wayside. They will always tell you you do not have strong enough evidence. We're not going to change all of our government policies and practices, or our policing policy and practices for extreme minority of issues, extremely rare, issues.
It seems to them a niche issue.
Well, whether it's niche or whether it's in their minds, actually, I'm trying to think of the word, but it's too tiny to actually have any focus on. Here is your problem. How will you get that evidence? I mean, one of the things we're doing, obviously, is this survey, and perhaps you could ask those non-Muslims, those ex-Muslims in your community to help with that, because we intend to put some global data together. But again, that's still not going to help you in Australia.
No.
You have to have ex-Muslims brave enough to
speak out. And this is why this conference is also, XMNA had researches done in a lot of, like, you know, Australia had their census research on how many Muslims have left Islam, and or like on I just want to stir back to the feminism,
because it's going again generalized, and it seems to be an analogy to what happens to women's topics.
Could we get just maybe each of you speak? I know you spoke about it a little bit before, but just your own individual support that you received since leaving Islam?
Since leaving Islam, the support I've received has been entirely personal, and a lot has been withdrawn. So when I didn't come out voluntarily, so there's a lot of bravery here that I cannot take credit for. I contributed to a book. That book was not supposed to leave Australian shores. The Daily Mail got a hold of it, spread it globally, my chapter, translated it into 5 languages, and sent it to Pakistan. My family didn't know I had contributed to that book. They knew as an atheist, they knew as an ex-Muslim. They just were happy that no one else knew, and now everyone knew. And now there are actual YouTube videos with my chapter written in Arabic, in Urdu, in English, in every language. So my support was very personal. My partner, my ex-husband, who I wrote the book with, and my friends. Very personal.
For me, I think very similar to Ishma. It was very personal. I had to create my own support group. I went to the Australian ex-Muslim group. It was a bit of support, but most of the time it had to be on my own. There was no left wing. There was no left that was supporting. There was no right from the other, like the conservative right that was supporting. I think people, whenever I spoke out about it, like I said, there were people, come to Christianity. Have you considered Hinduism? And that was, to me, that was just like, I don't think you're being sensitive about my situation and the mental trauma that I've had to go through. And that's what led me to open faceless hijab, because not many women are getting that support. Like I said, it's grown so much that there is a market for it, and it's clearly not being addressed, for women. And there's some people who've contemplated suicide. They're like, I can't live like this. I have bipolar disorder because, I had to wear a hijab at home and still be faithless. And that's why faithless hijabi. But, there was so many confusions. So I personally did not receive as much support, not even from my family. Now we've come in better terms. But, in terms of like support in Australia itself, nothing from the government, nothing from the people in other organizations, maybe very little things. But then I met Armin and then Harris, and we all just started talking about it. That's why, but I was missing out on meeting women who had gone through that. What about?
So I left home at 19, so 9 years ago. The first thought in my mind was survive. So I didn't care about my mental health. I didn't care about any of that. I was like, I have nowhere to live. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. How am I supposed to survive? And I disregarded myself. I did not seek counselling because I was like, no one can understand me, because every time I've gone to Centrelink, every time I've gone to job prospects, no one can understand where I'm coming from. They all stare at me with confusion. So I internalized a lot of what happened to me and all that sort of stuff. And it wasn't until probably about 2 years after I'd left home where everything just hit me at one time. I didn't have that support. I didn't have anyone to turn to. And I had a mental breakdown. I'm fully open about the fact that I had one of those. But that's why I do what I do. I had a young ex-Muslim woman reach out to me via Tumblr. And we were talking for a while. And she's like, I need help. I need support. And I said, okay, come and live with me. She lived on my couch for 1 year because I didn't have that support, so I was going to give that support. And there is no support to any ex-Muslim women or any woman. And I might even go a bit broader than that. There's not really any support for any woman leaving any religion in this country at all.
We'll take that question right after Sabeena shares that story. Her story, sorry.
When I first left, much similar to the others, I felt very isolated, and I didn't know even a support group existed. That is one of the issues with that it's an underground ex-Muslim group that I managed to find by chance months later. But by that time, all the support that I had was personal. Like Zara, I created my own support network, my own friends who I disclosed my issues to, and I mustered up the courage to speak to a psychologist. I had to very much do a very self-healing process in itself, to not care what others thought of me and not reveal my health issues to other people. And that's thankfully changed over the years.
Just your question. Yeah.
Yes.
So my first question might seem a little bit naive, but as an ex-Muslim, or as a Muslim in these countries where everyone is Islamic basically, how do people gain information about the real world outside of this context? Like how difficult is that when it's so deeply inculcated?
Social media. Social media has by far been so helpful to all of us.
Do you mean to Muslims living in Australia or Muslims living?
If you grow up in a society where it's all you ever hear, how are we finding channels to access people to show them what's wrong?
Well, there's a spectrum of Muslims primarily, so that's something that most people don't know. So we were discussing ourselves when we were doing a little ladies' chat in the toilet. The spectrum is broad. So a lot of Pakistanis here. And all of our Pakistans are very, very different. So my Pakistan, this is how I dressed in Pakistan.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but that's my Pakistani spectrum. So my access to information was huge. I only had information about the Western world. I only spoke English. I only traveled overseas. I've seen less of my own country and more of the rest of the world.
So that's how people get information, not just. And so then there'd be someone living in Australia in a little tiny cloistered community who has to claw every bit of information out from every access point.
I guess mine was a little different because I lived in Tanzania, not a theocratic country, still a very backwards developing country. I didn't know women could be Muslims and not wear hijab until I was 16 and left home and traveled to Malaysia. And, that way I was like, it's a Muslim country, but you can wear a hijab. And I couldn't understand it. At first I was like, how can you be a Muslim and not wear a hijab? I was so surprised.
I'll make a second comment. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
I am secular as well.
Yeah.
And that's great, and I understand that. But I just think maybe a strategy is that, there's Christians here as well. Maybe you don't want to alienate and generalize and group every religion into one category because it's so nuanced.
Yeah.
And, it's wonderful. I believe in separation of religion and state because you went to the Constitution, it's 116. We are, as Australia, not allowed to have a religion inculcated as, it's a separation of state and religion.
Go for it.
Okay. So my point is, if you want to tackle the issue, you can't alienate everybody because there's people like Nisa Hussein, who is an apostate, and he is a Christian. You need to actually learn to work with them. So I've heard a lot of negative criticism by
You go first.
Christians together. I know you're waiting to answer.
Yeah.
But, we need to kind of, when we're using his language, understand that his experience and his narrative is very valid too.
But we're not attempting to invalidate his. But sorry, Nick.
I'll let Nick go.
Okay, so I am part of a podcast called Heretics Corner. Heretics Corner doesn't just talk to ex-Muslims, they talk to ex-Jehovah's Witness, ex-Christians, ex-Jews, they talk to psychologists, they talk to authors of the room. Now, if you are an ex-Muslim who's converted to Christianity, and I know plenty of them, I have no issues with that. I'm pretty sure I know your story too, by the way. I think you did a documentary. Yeah. So I have no issues with that. But what we are talking about today is ex-Muslims and ex-Muslims and feminism, ex-Muslims speaking up. It literally says that on the banner right there in front of us.
He is an ex-Muslim.
Yes, he is. But what we need to understand...
After you.
Sorry. In a sense, we can't have... All right. I was... No, let's look from what's coming across. Okay, from the way that you were coming across.
No, but
that's fine.
But what exactly is your point?
And that's fine. You can be ex-Muslims, but like I said before, everybody has the right to be offended, and you can be sensitive about it. And it must be combated in all faiths, and I will make that. I am ready to make that statement.
I'm glad that you are, because Mariam Damazi, she has.
Maybe let them answer the question.
No, I just want to say very quickly, and I didn't need to.
Go for it.
But Laura, I didn't brief her. She made a very valid point.
Yeah.
Because I actually reached out to Mariam Damazi.
But can I just say something very, very simply? We're talking about, and again, an analogy for real life, we're talking about feminism and Islam. We're not talking about feminism. We're talking about feminism, Islam, and ex-Muslims. And so in that process, the discussion will be based on the feminist aspect and women's...
Incorporate holistically, that would be a great...
But we're not. But we're talking only in one. We're talking about a subsect. I mean, the holistic issue has been addressed in the conference. This is where we're looking at women's issues, which so often get derailed with everyone saying, "But look at the broader picture." But feminists need to be flexible and accept everyone. So we're just talking about this one perspective in this one panel for this one time.
And I'm just going to give another analogy to what Lara said, right? But he's an ex-Muslim and he's a Christian. And what Armin has said before, but they're a Muslim and they're progressive, right? You can always turn that story around, but that's not the issue, right? We need to tackle a problem regardless of religion. There is together, separately, it can be addressed individually. People have different responses. People have different approaches. Some work, some don't. People will work and tackle it differently.
In your opinion?
Every Australian pays $1,200 religious
tax exemptions.
Okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna let.
This is a panel about feminism only. We are.
Say an atheist is different from a Christian. Christian have been Christian. Come there.
I mean,
billions of dollars behind it.
I am loving the passion everybody
Any
has.
other questions? We'll take them later, but we'll keep this one on feminism for now.
This actually demonstrates some problem with 30 women speakers also.
Thank
Hello,
you.
this is a feminist panel?
There's a reason. There's a reason why we have.
Is that about
Yes,
Islam?
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to know the panel's response to when they get asked, when they get told, particularly by other women. I know you're gonna know this one. Islam is the feminist movement. So I thought that would be nice.
That is just what we discussed before. So Yasmin Al-Majid, who said Islam is a feminist religion, and I was interviewed on it from one of the social media. I think it's not mainstream media, by news.com. What is feminism? Does she know what feminism is? Does she know what feminism stands for? Feminism is equal rights. How does Islam have any equal rights when the scripture says that women are half of men in testimony? When it comes to inheritance, you get half of what your brother should get, and that women are
because of the assumption that you're married, so you'll have some of your
husband's
money.
and that women are incapable, like in testimony, women are incapable of making those decisions because they go through menstruation, or the other mental gymnastics is they haven't been exposed to the outside world, they don't work, so their exposure limits them to make any testimony in court, or they're deficient in their faith. It was a sermon by Imam Ali. It's a Shia. If you're familiar with the Shia faith, it was Sermon 80 when he said that women are deficient in their faith, and it's something that we mentioned when Armin and I did a podcast on the role of women. So it is not a feminist religion. It's either that she doesn't know, or the person who claims to say that it's a feminist religion does not know what feminism is. How is
there
hijab?
a certain type of feminist?
Exactly.
So Yasmin Abdel-Majid ascribes to what is called choice feminism. And what they talk about there is the freedom of choice is in itself feminism. So Miley Cyrus ascribes to the same brand of feminism. It is my choice to wear this style of clothing in these public spaces. So she says that's not me giving in to long internalized standards of misogyny. Both are opposite ends of the same spectrum. Yasmin Abdel-Majid, Miley Cyrus, choice feminists.
I've come across that one many times in my life. Islam is the most feminist religion on earth. Islam gave women rights before everybody else. Islam puts women on a pedestal. I don't want to be on a fucking pedestal. I don't. Please don't put me on a pedestal. It's too much responsibility. Muhammad, the man that every Muslim holds dear to the heart, you defame him, they will kill you. He has said that most of the inhabitants of hellfire are women. Now, if Islam is feminist and all about equal rights, why isn't it 50-50?
Why isn't it 50-50 in the scripture? So Surah Nisa, which is the surah that has the verse that you can, if you suspect your wife of misdemeanor or misbehavior, you can do step A, which I admonish. Step B, send her to bed apart. Step C, hit her, but in the fine print with a stick no bigger than a twig. There's no equal and opposite for men. There's no, if you suspect your husband of misdemeanor, smack him around a bit. There's no equal and opposite. So I'd be even okay with that verse, though I'm not for corporal punishment, if there is an equal and opposite, and there is not.
I'm just going to slide in.
Against Sharia, which is then a clash to clash of Western civilization in the West.
Just one sec. I'm just going to slide in the hijab that we were trying not to talk about it, but the hijab, as people think it's a feminist symbol, and I said this in GM Skeptic's video, the choice to make a decision of what you can wear, yes, that is liberating. But the symbol itself, what it represents, it's not. If you look at history, how hijab was introduced, regardless of head veilings existing pre-Islamic era, it was introduced to segregate Muslim women from slave women, where slave women were punished or were not allowed to wear hijab. And that was for women to be recognized that these are our properties, And these are women that are covered and they're going to wear hijab. And if that is feminism to you, I don't think, like, not to you, but if that is feminism to anyone, I don't think they know what feminism means. If you are conforming to that idea that hijab is in any form or in any way liberating, it is not. Ask women who wear it, ask women why they wear it, and ask women about what they think, the ones that wear it, ask women what they think about those who do not wear it and their choice in clothing.
It's about choice. Choice is not black and white. It's not as simple as I choose this and therefore this is freedom. Choice is nuanced and it has context. Your choice will be shaped by a millennia of internalized misogyny, whether you wear a bikini or whether you wear a hijab. So either way, it's influenced by misogyny. The question is examining that choice and not just embracing it because somebody's calling it feminist.
I feel like we've taken a lot of questions from this side and we're kind of abandoning that side.
Gotcha. Gracious.
Hi. Just had a question from the perspective of somebody who is completely an outsider on this, and thus may or may not sound somewhat ignorant. Okay, but from the outside looking in, it appears that the most powerful Islamic organization in Australia is the Women's Organization of Women's Islamic Organization of Australia. They're invited to all the meetings. I used to know some of their members for various reasons, and it's kind of interesting from the outside looking in because they appear at least to be very powerful, very well known, and so I would think that would be part of the justification that these people would use to say that it's really good for women, even though in the actual countries where it's primarily practiced, it's not. So I guess my question would be, one, how are you going to deal with this organization? Because you were talking about domestic violence before. They actually run DV shelters. That's how I can contact you because I needed to get domestic violence services to somebody. Long story, I'm not going through it now, but yeah. So just a general question in regards to them, how you want to deal with them.
Everybody should have a platform to talk, so I'm not going to take away their platform to talk, but introduce them to me. I'll be the ex-Muslim woman, so is Nik, and we're happy to be on board as well. We want to help as well. We want to represent that minority that we haven't been representing, the ex-Muslim women. There are plenty in Australia. And yeah, I think in terms of how to deal with it, have more diversity, push bounds, talk to people. Conversations are more important. Conversations is what leads change.
What sort of misogyny have you received from the ex-Muslim community?
So leaving Islam is is a step, right, for men leaving Islam, but that does not necessarily equate to them leaving their misogynistic values behind. Right? There are men who talk about being feminists. I will accept that once they've proven it to me. And there are men who are supportive of women taking a stand. But I've also met ex-Muslim men who are still misogynistic and still sexist. Like it doesn't change. Not overnight. Not over just losing your religion. If it was a harder process for you to lose your religion, let alone all of this cultural indoctrination that had to do with misogyny, that had to do with criticizing Muhammad and everything else that comes with it. It's always a step, and what we need to do is have more women speak. A lot of women are not enough women are speaking. I don't know as many that are activists. I'll be working with Nik on this, and I'll be working with some other people in the UK, but not many. The misogyny does not disappear over time only because they've left Islam. That comes along. It's like a baggage they carry on unless they actively work.
It does help them.
We're going to come to that before. I'm waiting for that panel. I have time.
Misogyny from white women. So I've had a very specific kind of white feminist misogyny where when I tell my story, they go quiet, they go awkward, they back off, they have very little to say. I have been told I am being offensive to the Muslim women in feminist communities I belong to and where I speak at. I have been told that when I participate in these forum discussions, they'll happily give platform to Muslim feminists. But I will keep on saying hi Hi. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I was just going to ask you a question. I think this is for everybody else as well. How have the Western or the Muslim feminists helped ex-Muslim women? If they're feminists, shouldn't they be helping all women?
That's how I would see it. I would see it as feminist overall,
Yeah.
regardless of faith or religion or what or lack of.
Do you think that when ex-Muslim feminists or women talk about Islam and you know, the things that they have been through, just like any other Muslim group, they take offense to that? Like,
of course.
Yeah. They
Yeah,
take offense to
definitely.
that and they start defending that?
Yeah, of course. So something that you're taught from such a young age as a young Muslim woman is that, you know, Islam gave you rights for anyone else. And it's like, I'm going to say it's bludgeoned into your head. It's not like kind of subtly, but it's like banged into your head. Islam gave you rights for everyone else. And so you're taught also from a young age to be so defensive about your religion. So when this woman comes up who's loud and abrasive and says, your religion says this, Muslim feminists who say they're feminists and they're all for women's rights, they're like, no, not you. We're going to put you onto the corner because we don't want to have anything to do with you because, yes, you're a woman and, yeah, I support your choice to be free, but don't fuck with my religion. And that's how it is. And I think, like, you know, Zara and I were recently on a podcast about No Hijab Day, and there was Muslim women and ex-Muslim women talking about the hijab. And
the modesty culture.
And the modesty culture. And that was... I was shocked. As someone who's been doing this for such a long time, I've always received a massive backlash from Muslim feminists. And I was like, it's happening and it's a slow progress. And I think it will happen where more Muslim women who call themselves feminists will be able to defend ex-Muslim women's rights.
Or defend women's rights in
women's
general.
rights.
I think it is a symptom of, I don't know if you want to call it internalized misogyny or Stockholm syndrome, but there is a huge enabling.
Yeah, there's an enabling
of
also
misogyny happening in the Muslim and ex-Muslim community.
and by women themselves as well.
Yeah.
There's definitely, if men are being misogynist, where is it coming from? Who is accepting that? Right? If women had fought back, had you empowered all the women to fight back, it would have slowly diminished. But what's happening is that women are also being enablers to it. And we need to we need to stop blaming only the men for it. There's the women who are also not doing their part.
So I'm going to play a question
Sure.
now, just because this guy's been read it, and then I'll come back to you, just because you had a question.
I wanted to ask whether you had any sort of explanation for why so-called religious freedom has trumped feminist ideals among feminists.
Because everything trumps feminists. Everything trumps women.
But even among feminists.
Everything trumps women and women's issues. Economics trumps it. Race trumps it. Religion trumps it.
Even among all feminists.
Yes, even among feminists there is a divide. There is an internalized misogyny. A gentler approach would be calling it Stockholm syndrome, where even women negate and deride and diminish and marginalize women. So you look shocked, but those are my experiences, and it's not just anecdotal. Nothing is less important than women's issues.
I think carrying on from that, a very, very good example of it is White Wednesday in Iran. And you have women in hijab going up to other women not in hijab, telling them, I'm going to call them a Radley priest on you, put your hijab on, you are naked, you are shameful, you are this, you are that. And it's women themselves which are enforcing that misogyny on women. Go to Somalia. It's not the men saying, commit FGM on our daughters, it's the
FGM
women
arrest
committing it on their
in UK,
daughters.
A 37-year-old woman got her 3-year-old daughter.
And so it is...
But it's all on the basis of Sharia.
Sharia is a fact. The Sharia is part of Islam. So when you're talking about Muslims and you're talking about the things that they do, it's part of Sharia and that is in Islam. It's the same thing.
But get this lady just
sorry,
ask
Laura,
the last
go.
question before we bring Harris in.
Why not causes why doesn't that turn up for us as I did last time? Sorry about that, guys. I just want to make my point. You said that the most important issue in life is, I'm going to just present something, is women's issues. I would say men have issues too.
I never said that.
So being pro-women,
That wasn't actually my question. I want to say, is there ever a possibility, and this is just out of my curiosity, that their hijab could become something that could be choice?
The hijab is a choice for a woman who converts to Islam in Australia. Hijab is not a choice for a woman living in Saudi Arabia.
Let me put this into perspective. You're a 4-year-old girl. You're a 4-year-old girl, and all you're told is once you're a woman, the way you won't go to hell, the way you will be a pure woman, the way you will be respectable is when you wear hijab. So that is not a choice, it is coercion. So the people, like I said, the choice to make a decision to what.
We could divorce ourselves with this millennia of ideology that's caused this illusion of choice.
Once we remove Islam, I think when people decide to wear headscarves without having the fear of hellfire, yes, that could possibly be a choice of hijab.
Yeah, it's
That
just
could
a symbol
possibly,
of
no,
that
and I
matters.
wouldn't call it a hijab then. It wouldn't be called a hijab. It would be called a headscarf.
You probably have to rename it.
Rename it. You'd probably have to rename it. Like I said, head veilings existed before pre-Islamic era, and the hijab existed after Muhammad brought in. The word existed after Muhammad brought in, and hijab means a curtain.
So, yeah.
So once that ideology has removed, head coverings, head scarves, caps, everything. So when people compare like head veilings or caps to wearing a hijab, I'm like, no, these are two different concepts.
It's when you get to the point where
Yeah, and I absolutely think.
Before we bring up Harrison, Amir,
can I just say something just before we finish?
Yeah.
I realise we have feminism.
Feminism.
Feminism and Islam, domestic violence, something like that. But I think Yasmin had a point because the two countries with the lowest rates of reported domestic violence in the world, Saudi Arabia and
The women with the lowest what?
Reported rates of domestic violence.
Reported rates. Of course. I actually, you know what? Come to talk to me after this conference, and we can talk about Saudi Arabian women in depth.
We'll add to our panelists now, so we can open up the questioning as well. So
I. Harris, I had a mini session about in the car, both yelling at each other while I was trying to sleep. It was great. And I wanted them to save it for today. So while a lot of here you've seen us agree with each other on most issues because we've been through that experience, you'll find that this panel will have a lot of disagreements, and I hope we're still friends by the end of this.
I really don't think that it's actually a disagreement. It's more so it's getting lost into the semantics because I mean both Armin is an avid hater of the word reform. I think he's just got an allergy to the word reform. Let me steelman you, and then you could probably respond to that. But he. To my understanding, what he thinks Islam can't be reformed, and someone else raised the question as well, that Islam can't be reformed, it's a literal word of God. But as I said before, it's just, Islam has been reforming for the last 1400 years. What we're seeing today is evidence that we have 72 plus sects of Islam, and that's not how Muhammad envisioned it. Muhammad envisioned Islam through a very narrow band of principles and values that he propagated to everyone. And everyone lived by that. As long as his death was concerned. But after that, straight away, it divided into Sunni and Shia. As I gave an example before, the biggest reform part would be the fact that you don't own slaves anymore. In Pakistani society, I would say, and that is probably true for Indonesia and Malaysia as well, the practice of polygamy is not common in these countries. But if you go to Middle East, polygamy is very common. Now, that is not to say that all Pakistanis are very liberal people. They're not. You'll see that they've got all types of problems as far as women are concerned. So my point is, Islam has been reforming. We cannot deny that. We know that there are people who would be creating Islam in their own vision, and then they would have different results to it. We have Imam Tawhidi, the Imam of Peace, right? He calls himself a Muslim. And he calls himself a reformist Muslim. Now, the version of Islam that he's preaching is very different to the version of Islam that someone else is preaching. Now, he does have some followers. There are people who look up to him and who want to follow what he's saying about it. I obviously disagree with him on everything. Now, the other question you might be thinking that if you're an atheist, why can't you just propagate atheism to Muslims? Are you thinking that they're not smart enough to deal with atheism? Or you're thinking that they need some sort of a Islam, they need some sort of a religion? I'm not saying that. If they want to do that, that's fine. And it's nothing's more frustrating to an atheist to realize that, okay, well, this person is now changing the date of Aisha just to make it compatible. Now, in his mind, he's trying to get rid of child marriages. He's trying to reform Islam. Now, a lot of other people, they say, okay, there is a positive side effect of that. That we're at least going to get a little less dangerous version of Islam everywhere. Now, obviously, we have other examples, which are fluctuations in the time that we have, that you see, okay, for example, a country like Iran and Egypt, Hosni Mubarak was very liberal by Middle Eastern standards. But then we had these overthrows of governments, and then we saw this sudden influx of this Islam, and you could argue that, okay, well, because Islam has been lingering for the last 1400 years, that's why we gave them the room to come back. But we know that this is not how societies work. We just can't control. We can keep having conversation. I'm an atheist advocate. I would rather have someone leave Islam altogether. But I can also acknowledge that it's like a two-way strategy where the reformists are attacking Islam and they're constantly reinterpreting and modifying Islam. And then obviously you have ex-Muslim atheists as well, who are just totally obliterating Islam the way they are. So I think Armin and I mostly agree, but I just don't understand why he just, well, again, I could be wrong, but I feel like he's just not willing to acknowledge and gets into the semantics that, okay, Muslims who reform, not Islam. I think when a Muslim is reformed, he has reformed Islam. Otherwise, he would say, well, I no longer believe in Islam anyway.
You good to go?
Or should we move on? Because we've got.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Armin might want to respond.
Okay. So Nick, would you like to add? I know you're passionate about the topic as well.
Islam cannot be reformed.
Thank you.
From an Islam, if we want to take it to a theological, take the Muslims out of that from the thing, we take it back to a very theological and study the aqidah and the fiqh, the jurisprudence, the laws of everything that is in Islam. It cannot be reformed. Because when you reform Islam, you are changing Islam, and by changing Islam, you are taking yourself out of the fold of Islam, and therefore you are an ex-Muslim.
It doesn't follow logic. They don't like to follow a straight line like that.
But that's Islam from an Islamic perspective. I'm saying it as someone who is.
We're going to take questions after, so I'm just going to let the conversation flow and then be open to questions, if that's okay with everyone.
I believe that human beings can reform. I believe you can be a Muslim and you can reform. You can decide that you're not going to kill your daughter if she sleeps with a boy outside of marriage. You make those decisions as a human being, and I'll give you that value as a human being to make those decisions. It has nothing to do with Islam.
No one's saying that, but they're changing their reform.
You can't change those.
Yeah, I know that.
Islam
but
itself says, "Don't change me," and if you change me,
that.
I'm no longer Islam.
I know that, but that's not what a Muslim is seeing it as. He's saying, okay, Muhammad was peaceful. Fine, they believe in that. You can throw them all the facts that you want that Muhammad was not peaceful. They're not going to accept it. So they in their own mind, they're creating their own version of Islam, and it's a reality. There are people out there.
So what you're saying is basically, at least it's nicer. So let's just do it.
I don't agree with any Islam at all. I'm simply acknowledging that there are people who do that, and it is less dangerous than the actual ISIS that we have.
So from what I understand, where we're all agreeing is from the theology part, it cannot be reformed. Is that what we are agreeing?
Yeah.
Okay, so we all agree. So what we're having a disagreement on is what is the problem with reformists and ones that are being reformed? Is that
and I'd just like to add something else to it. I want to add something else to that, to what you're saying, and tack on this little bit and see if everyone is on the same page, and if not, we can dismiss it. And that is, even if it is reformable, why bother?
Yeah. Well, I know that. I would, if I could just tell everyone leave Islam altogether tomorrow, I would, and I do that. But I know that that's not how it is happening, and that's not how it's going to go. There are other people as well. People like Majid Nawaz, Imam Tawhidi. There's so many other Tariq Fateh. There's so many Islam reformers who are going to be there, who are going to hold on to their fairy tales, and then they're still going to. They're going to create their own version of Islam, and there will be people who are desperate to believe in Islam to be true, and they would hold on to that. That's what I'm saying. I get it. It's intellectually dishonest.
No, sorry. Just quickly, I want to make a point. You can be a Muslim. I have no issues with that. You can be a Muslim, and you can pick all the pretty and the nice and the loving and the caring and the amazing aspects of Islam. You can change it and try and jump through as many hoops as you possible to make that work. But the difference is, that person might be like, okay, well, the Quran says this. But then you have people like ISIS who are going to be like, well, the Quran actually says this, and I'm going to follow through with this. So it doesn't matter that Amina from freaking Brody decides that she doesn't want to like go and kill everyone who doesn't go up against Islam, but it's not going to change the fact that there is Muhammad down the road who wants to blow up and wants to blow up the MCG and wants to kill Muslims. It's not going to change the facts. You can't change that.
But what can happen is like that Muhammad might change as well once he sees the reformed Islam. That's the
So
point.
I'm going to put in my opinions from what Armin had said in his speech about selling the lie, and atheists that support reformation are basically are enabling selling that lie. I think that's a very polarized view. I think as an ex-Muslim, my goals is to see more tolerance. Yes, I do not want any religion in this world. I'm anti-religion. But if we can live in the short term to see more tolerance, yes, fine. I will, I'll let people do their reformation or preach their reformation as long as I'm getting my goal, which is to stop conservatives going into the Islamist side, to stop people from, terrorist attacks
There
as
should be no
much as
tolerance for bullshit.
there should be no
dangerous
tolerance.
game. That's like a little bit of bad stuff is better than a lot bit of bad stuff.
Yeah, but then as long as we can help
I'm
move.
not supporting reform.
I'm not supporting
I'm
reform either.
acknowledging it.
I'm just.
I'm saying it is there.
It is
I'm
there.
saying
I
it.
just.
I'm saying it.
I just think I'm not. I just think I'm not anti-reform. I don't think I'm
I
anti-reform.
am anti-reform.
And that's
Anti-Islamic reform, not anti-Muslim reform. I'm not sensitive about the word reform. There is a reform that is happening. It's not Islamic reform. It's Muslim reform. And Muslims reform not by changing Islam. Muslims reform by ignoring Islam. Everybody keeps pointing out to the Muslims that are peaceful. Well, are they getting any of their peacefulness out of Islam? It has nothing to do with Islam.
But what do you think the reformists are doing when you say Muslim reform? What do you think the reformists are doing
They're
to
actually
enable
looking
that?
at the Quran.
They're
and
not
they are
enabling
looking
it.
They're not enabling change in the community. They're looking at varying interpretations and timelines and chronology within.
And what is the result of all of that?
I don't think that's coming from there. I don't think there's any connection between what's happening with the Quran and what's happening in the Muslim community. So I have Muslim LGBTQI people who are saying that, yep, I'm Muslim and I'm gay and I don't eat pork, but I sleep with women. And I'm just like, what? And that's her making a choice that suits her lifestyle personally away from the Quran.
The interesting thing is that even first of all, the reformist leaders have nothing to do with the fact that Muslims are peaceful. Muslims are peaceful because they're better than Islam. Okay?
We've all agreed.
And the reformists themselves, look at their stories. They themselves, that when they were radical and then decided to be more liberal or be more moderate, look at their stories. They themselves were not influenced by the Quran and Hadith, and now they're prescribing, coming up with a new interpretation of the Quran for bringing other people out of radical Islam. You know who has brought people out of radical Islam and make them either atheists or more moderate? Richard Dawkins, Carl Sagan, not people that are reformists.
Yeah, but how has the world how has the Muslim world become better in terms of
not as a result of Islam?
I'm fine. That's fine. Yeah, but social media. But how has it become better? Why are there still conservative Muslims existing, and how did they and those that became liberal? What is the change of that? Yes, it's Muslim, but what is happening is, why did they not just leave religion? Why did they become liberal? Why didn't they just abandon it?
So like I said, there's a war of ideas happening in every person's mind, right? When people say, Armin, you want outright atheism. No, Muslims within their own minds are moving away from Islam. Even if they're not completely saying they're atheists, their lives are being less influenced by Islam. And that's because of people like you that are challenging Islam, not people that are trying to come up with excuses for Islam, which includes reform, to like, hey, maybe we shouldn't get rid of it. Any bullshit should be completely, anything that is not compatible with reality, we should not have tolerance for. Whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's Wu, whether it's astrology, whether it's demonology, whether it's whatever, homeopathy, they're all nonsense. And if you think like, oh, this is nonsense, but it's not harmful, well, when you open the gates to belief without evidence, you really don't have control what comes in and what comes out anymore. When you allow harmless nonsense without evidence, you're also allowing harmful nonsense without evidence.
And also some of this is, when we're talking about Islamist reform and we're talking about actually pulling out verses that have been actively harmful, say Surah Nisa. Yeah, and there's yeah.
We know it all. The only Quran you remember.
So they are looking at reforming that. In fact, there is a female cleric in San Francisco who is looking at that verse and looking at the meanings of the word strike. And she's presenting all sorts of gymnastics, mental and linguistic that is detracting from the issue while you are involved in the intellectual arguments and debate around reform and what nicer, kinder word you could plug in. Women are getting beaten in the name of Islam.
I'm going to sound like a Muslim apologist now, but what would you rather have someone saying that this daraba means symbolic striking rather than the actual beat the shit out of it?
Can I answer that?
Can I answer? No, I haven't finished. Okay. I haven't finished my point. So you could argue that even symbolic beating is bad and it should never be allowed. But what would you rather have if you are a woman who's married to a Muslim man? Would you rather have him believe that, okay, just symbolic beating, or would you rather have him believe that, okay, beat the shit out of it?
I don't want there to be there's no spectrum. There's no spectrum. And this is preventing zero tolerance.
Yeah, but the third option is there's no option.
The third option is have stronger legislature in place that overrides this sort of claim to religious freedom, so that somebody can get in there and say, smack her with a toothpick or smack her with your hand.
But wouldn't you think that it could be a step-by-step process, a person who might actually go through the
No, can I answer that? The step-by-step process is exactly the opposite. When people challenge barbaric backwards ideology, right? And most people understand that this is not okay. The Muslim that wants this to mean something else, they're already a person that doesn't want to beat their wife. You trying to translate it to something else is not going to change their mind. They already don't want to beat their wives. But what you do with coming up with a new interpretation is you are keeping Islam relevant. More of these Muslims that think wife beating is wrong are more likely to not be used as pawns of this ideology, because all these peaceful Muslims that don't follow Islam but call themselves Muslims, they are giving legitimacy and authority to an idea that is used for actually beating women.
But we also know the bond between a person and a believing person with his doctrine, whichever that is. But you said that, okay, that would be encouraging you, but no, but there might be another step between that they might actually get rid of that verse altogether.
That's not a step in between. That's actually a step for reinforcing.
But they will retain the rest of the Quran. And there was a I think it was New South Wales, the judge said that Muslims should look into abrogating the violent verses. Now, who's to say that in 20, 30 years' time, now again, I would rather have Islam gone altogether along with all the other religious nonsense. But who's to say that in 20, 30 years, all the bad verses of Islam are actually deleted? They're actually not in the mainstream.
I would still be against Islam.
I would be too, but would that be worse?
Love it, guys. So Armin's proposal, I feel, is the long-term approach into removing Islam. The short term, I don't think it works. In the short term, I don't think it can go up to a fundamentalist and go like atheism, because that is not going to work. Because what approaches have worked is the transitioning phase that reformists have enabled.
Zara, if I could just, I don't know if I'm going to be acting as an interpreter for Armin or just talking my own point, but it's not a sequential process. I'm talking not just from the standpoint of an ex-Muslim. Psychologically, learning, we'd love to think learning was sequential. It's not. It's exponential. Learning in evolution takes dramatic, exponential, step-skipping leaps. So even if you follow the evolution of man or animals or birds or whatever, it's not neat sequences. So sometimes this sequential process is actually doing more damage and suggesting that a gentler pathway that is the softly approach would at least protect some people on the pathway to a full awareness, actually can do more harm and lengthen the process.
Because I agree with this.
I've got a one-liner. I agree with you. It might not be sequential, but it is still a linear process, isn't it?
No,
it's not.
No,
it's a trap.
Actually not.
And do you think unlearning would be the same thing? Do you think unlearning is like a one-day thing where you just unlearn everything that you've known for 20 years?
One at a time.
Okay, so these are people that are. It's a trap to keep people that you give them. They were in the process of understanding that this is nonsense, and if you didn't give them this excuse to keep this ideology, they would have probably said, "Okay, this is fucking bullshit. I can't believe in this." It's a trap that keeps them in there. And also, the people that say, "Oh, people are not just going to give a religion overnight," well, if you want baby steps, go with baby steps that are intellectually honest. Doubt is a baby step. Introduce Muslims. A Muslim that is only 99% sure about Islam is not going to harm anybody in the name of Islam. It's not going to sacrifice their children's lives in the name of Islam. Introduce that. It's very easy to tell people, like, maybe you're wrong. This whole reform process, you have to be like, okay, this verse that tells you that you should beat your wife means something else, and this verse means something else, and all these, you have to do the same process if that for 1,000 different verses in the hadith, and people are like, oh, Armin, you're not being practical. You're not being practical. I'm telling them it's just a simple, the process that we're offering them is like, hey, is it possible that all of this is nonsense? It's a much more simple solution, and it works much more, and it is a baby step. Go.
It's a simplistic process. So I'm going to give you a very simplistic analogy, or even two. So you quit smoking with a nicotine patch, or you quit smoking cold turkey. Coming off of a nicotine patch is a whole separate process. I know, because I quit smoking after like 30 years. I smoked longer than I didn't smoke. And people say, oh, but cold turkey is really difficult, so just titrate it. No, don't titrate it. Come off cold turkey, because the process coming off a nicotine patch, oh my God. Or quitting sugar. Quit sugar and have stevia. You still have the biological taste of sugar, and you're maintaining that need for that sweet taste and the dopamine hit you get.
Yeah, but
you're sustaining it.
Yeah, but
We're really
very,
gonna
very
have to open up to questions, because we are going to run out of time.
But the mind that actually, the mind that actually selects to go either on nicotine patch or just cold turkey, there would be different minds. So
yeah, and that's what Armin was talking about.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. That there would be a person who might be able to get rid of Islam altogether, or might actually want to find a way that he can hold this one way.
Just with questions, if you have directed questions, that is fine. If you just have it open, please state that. To direct your questions to the speakers. Go for it.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to see you all. So one clarification and one question, which is also clarification.
Who is it to?
Is it?
To all of you.
Okay.
Anybody can.
Oh, that's true.
The problem with this Islam, it's a clarification. So there is one particular conception of Islam, which is, let us say, that of Muhammad himself, right? That we can say is the authentic conception. Then say, for instance, I might have my conception, and EB might have his conception. So we will have different, and Stephen might have some other conceptions. So we could have all these different concepts. But the point is that actually, historically, nobody really knows Muhammad's conception. So it's only our own conceptions that we know. And it's these conceptions that add together to form some religion or another. So the point is that there could indeed be multiple conceptions of religion operating. So in practice, what Islam may be, this composite of whatever the conceptions that people have. Now, that's the easy point.
Can you make it shorter so that closer?
Right, but the second point is more important. This business of reform. And I meant to ask another question, but I'll leave it because this captures everything. The problem here is this. There is a deep existential question of like who I am, who am I, what am I doing? And in fact, the West came to this, and it's commonly acknowledged through Descartes and the Cartesian subject, who it's just a pure subjectivity who's asking, how could I be sure that I exist? So this is where we start. And so once you get to that, you are an individual, you are there, and you're comporting yourself to your own most being. Is there a
question in there?
Right?
Sorry, what was the question?
We want a question, to the point question rather than a statement.
No, it's both a question and a statement, but I want you to consider this possibility. So because I have to have this, I have a choice. So now I'm choosing the atheist sequence here. So the choice here would be that I start with being a pure Muslim, then I start being a reformer, so that I'm now a little bit open.
The next statement should be ending with a question mark.
Then,
the next say should end with a question mark and nothing else.
And that becomes an atheist. So what I'm saying is,
No, what you're saying. What's the question?
Yeah. So my question is, just having said what I have told you, would you like to consider your view about the reform of Islam as well?
No.
So I understand that, and those were my steps. Yeah, so those were my steps, and that is what kept me in Islam longer, when I thought there was a reform possible and that I was a progressive Muslim and my ideologies were not in line with Islamic ideologies. But that's what helped me be stronger in my opinions as an atheist, because then I was like, I've tried everything else, it's not working. right? And that's why I'm not saying I'm pro-reform or pro-Islam reform. I'm just saying that that is a methodology that certainly works. And surely Armin and everybody else who's very much not for reformists would think otherwise.
We'll record a video with Armin over reform, so if anyone would want to watch it, we can have an extended edition of that.
Yeah.
No
question.
I've got a social dilemma in that I've got a Turkish academic at one of the main universities, and she's come to my place quite often, and she will say, for instance, there's no compulsion in Islam, and not realise that I've got.
I'm going to let Nik answer this.
I've got the books there with the rest of the paragraph, etc., or tell me that I can't read Arabic, and I might have a friend who can speak Arabic. And my dilemma is, how hard do I not tolerate her? Because she'll quote the cosmological argument as if I already know all the solutions, and I've actually told her, no, you can look at this. Here are the arguments against that. I don't have to dance with you. And eventually I got to the point. Armin had told me on one of the podcast things the actual acts of Muhammad, and you made a list of them one time of his actual physical acts that were so disgusting. I started listing those, and she grabbed her husband and left. Now, my question is, how forthright should I be or not be?
What's your intention?
Well, when she was, I had another friend who was a refugee from Malaysia who got very upset with this lady, and so I had a very mixed crew in the house, and so she will tend to bully. She was bullying, and I wasn't going to tolerate it, so I actually got quite assertive. But in general, I'm outside the problems you guys have. I actually want to make effective responses, and rather than I could be a lot more assertive, or I could be a lot.
It depends on your level. Depends on how much tolerance you have for people. Like, it really depends on your personal.
Well, I like cooking and the sharing. Right. But the thing is, you suddenly have somebody who's actually, they might. You could even say that if they were leaving at home, you've profit.
I mean, this actually goes back to something else that Laura was saying, that you shouldn't be, you don't want to lose allies for Christians. And I was like, if people are gonna not be friends with you because they have disagreements with you, you don't really need those kind of friends. I mean, there are a lot of even Muslims that are supporting of us shedding on Islam. I know a lot of Muslims that are supporting us. And I mean, I disagree with them. I think they believe in really stupid things, but they accept our disagreements with each other, and it could still be allies. And there are Christians that are allies with us atheists, even though we constantly attack. Yeah, but that doesn't require. Yes, but that doesn't require us not attacking Christianity. There are Christians that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I personally am an example in Tanzania, not to be like Zara, because I was the first Tanzanian who came out publicly. I don't know any other Tanzanian from my community who actually came out publicly. And everybody knows my family, so they received a lot of backlash. So in the madrasa, Saturday school, I'm an example of this is why we should be teaching critical thinking to, in Islamic schools, which I think critical thinking stops when religion starts. But I am an example of now people going like, do you know Zara Kay? Yeah, we're not going to be like her. Or like I have kids who, when their parents force them to pray, and she's like, I'm going to record you and send it to Zara Kay and tell her you're forcing me to pray. So,
Your question.
Sorry?
Sorry. So,
that's not
it's bad strategy.
All right, we're just going to take another question, John.
Sorry.
Yeah, I've got a question and perception about Islam reform. I'll ask you to comment on this, please. I think that I agree that Islam can't be reformed. You can't actually change the text to mean something it doesn't mean. When you look at the way that people like Armin Navabi tries to deal with it, he seems to rely on the argument that he can interpret the text to almost mean the opposite of what it means. And this is the idea of reform. So it's a little bit disingenuous and a pointless exercise, but I can see some kind of point to it. I think perhaps the way I read people like him is he's not really, he says he's a Muslim, but still is aware of all those deficiencies and human rights problems. But I think it's a tactic.
That's what I agree with.
And in that way, I can maybe see that there's some benefit because he gets publicity. It comes out, because he gets to criticize Islam from that point of view, whereas other people would be ignored. So that's the only benefit I can see.
There's definitely a tactic, but again, I understand the dilemma of other ex-Muslim atheists, for example. They say, okay, you're saying all the right things. What do you secretly really do believe in? For example, with Majid, I always wonder, I mean, is he actually an atheist? Or if he is, I know he doesn't say it, but he says everything atheistic. But if he is an atheist, then why is he actually trying to reform Islam? That's why I would question his intellectual honesty. But there could be genuine people who genuinely want to reform Islam and they're still deluded.
So to that I say that the best way to fight nonsense is with the truth, not another version of nonsense. And I just want to read a quote by Bertrand Russell. He said, this is my favorite quote, I just recently discovered. There can't be a practical reason for believing what isn't true. It seems to me a fundamental dishonesty and a fundamental treachery to intellectual integrity to hold a belief because you think it's useful and not because you think it's true. We fight for the truth and we don't hold back. We don't, not when it's just easy, but also when it's hard. We don't, when people think that, okay, this is useful, maybe these people need this kind of nonsense. No, we always fight nonsense. We always fight bullshit. The filter that you could introduce to people is critical thinking skills to enhance their bullshit radar. If you remove that filter, you have lost all control over where they're going to land with their beliefs. It's not up to you anymore. No, we can't intervene anymore. What argument are you going to present to people to believe in something over another if you don't have the tools to recognize bullshit over another?
All right, we'll go one last question.
We have one last question. The guy in the black. Oh no, both in black. That's like, oh no.
So I believe that reforming Islam actually makes faster for Muslims to leave Islam because I came from that place. I don't think that if I was a Muslim, I would just jump to being
Didn't say that though.
But do you think that supporting reformers will actually help make Muslims be
I think
aware
yes. I think yes. Not the reform movement, but supporting reformers
Right.
is a different thing.
Right, yes.
So supporting reform, I support Majid Namaz and what he does. I don't necessarily stand for everything he says,
No.
but I find personally in the stories that I've received on women, like this is not anecdotal anymore, right? I've received hundreds of stories of women or people have transitioned, and just like yourself, I transitioned and maybe many others. So it was the idea of reform that kept me longer in Islam, which obviously extends the problem even more, but it also helps me come out of it. You know, the idea of like me leaving Islam at the age of like 14 was, it never existed. But the idea of reform at that time was like, okay, this is working, this is working, this is working. It extended, but like that's what I said, in the shorter time, it actually works. For me, it did. For some people, in the shorter time, it works for like leaving it faster. In the longer, but there are people who respond, and like I mean, there are people who respond when you tell them a bullshit. There are people who will come out, but you know, I will support reformers. And I think that's why we have this disagreement. Like I'm not anti-reformist because for me that means that I'm not supporting the reformers. That's what I stand on.
Okay,
Unfortunately, we're gonna have to.
Can I make one clarification?
Can it be quick?
Yes. Islam needs to die. Reformers are slowing the process. That's what I've said.
Oh, can we all get a photo? Can we all get a photo?
Photo of the 60 with the standing up with.
Oh.
Without all the glasses.
But like everyone's so tall, I
Right
need to
where
like
you are
stand
is
on a
good.
chair.
I can move this side them a little bit closer so I get the. I'll just do that. Very
Like, I'm gonna like stand on a chair.
Everyone's standing still. Zara, she
Yeah, can you all like?
Do I need to like?
Oh, no, it's fine. Oh, thank you. Nice.
Put your hands in the pockets.
Jeez, I mean, you don't have to be so nervous.
Let's have a look at that. Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry that I'm not an ex-Muslim, but I've just got a few extra things I want to add. I think that the fact that you all came here today shows that I want to thank you for your support, because I think it is such a worthy cause, and I think that what ex-Muslims are doing is the hope. It is the hope for the future, and it's so important that their voices be heard. And I'm proud that we are able to give the support of what we can for the ex-Muslims to get their voice across. And it is a terribly difficult thing, as many people today have mentioned and have faced this issue, is that so many people that I know who are atheists, and I would expect to have supported this because, as Armin said, it's the greatest human rights issue of our time. And atheists ought to be concerned with that purely on that basis. So we just have to keep fighting for it. I just want to say a couple of things, and the secular party is not making any financial gain out of this, but we're proud to be associated with it. The secular party is the only party in Australia that would seek to not only end religious funding of religious schools, but to protect children from religious indoctrination, which is, to do that would be in the best interest of the child and in favour of the rights of the child, because the child actually does have a right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and freedom from coercion in religion. Now, there's just a couple of things I want to say about my personal perspective on how to deal with these issues. I have taken a big interest in the historical claims of religion and the moves that they make. And that, I believe, is the weakest point. No, for example, I was looking at a ex-Muslim video the other day, and he was trying to challenge in the Quran it says that the Kaaba was built by the prophet Abraham, and had an elaborate map showing throughout his life where he travelled throughout Babylon and ended up in Hebron and so forth, and showing that no, he could never have gone anywhere near Mecca at that time. Fine, well, in fact, historically, Mecca didn't exist at that time and didn't exist even at the time of Muhammad. But the thing that struck me is that because Islam is derived from these other religions, like Judaism, it's not only the historical claims of Islam that can be challenged, the historical claims of the other religions, and in particular, the prophet Abraham and the Israeli archaeologists. And archaeology is the biggest weapon for atheism, because you dig up the ground and you find that it contradicts the scripture. There is not only no evidence for the prophet Abraham, historically there was no prophet Abraham. There was no Exodus from Egypt. There was no Moses. So the 179 times that the Quran refers to the prophet Moses is referring to a fictional figure. And I could go on to say that all religions have a subject of this historical fabrication, where the history is backdated and rewritten as it was supposed to have been. There's no evidence for the historical existence of Jesus from the actual time, nor, despite all this overwhelming information we have about the life of the Prophet, that the Prophet actually existed at the time he was supposed to exist. So all of those claims are subject to a great deal of doubt, and in fact, all of that stuff is simply made up stories, and it's not challenged. It's not challenged even in academia, whereas it should be. Now, I want to say also something about the motivation for why it's so important to support this cause. It's not just the biggest human rights problem of our time. It's the greatest human welfare problem of our time. There are more refugees now than at any time since the Second World War, most of them coming from the Middle East. Now, people would deny that all the trouble in the Middle East has got anything to do with Islam. I think those denials are wrong. I mean, the way that religion affects the psychology of society has a direct effect on the conduct of those societies and the conflicts that arise in them and the lack of democracy and the lack of human rights that exists in them. And I would attribute, not entirely but mostly, the great cost of human welfare and humanitarian catastrophe that is existing in the Middle East, and Syria, particularly Syria and Iraq, because of that. And it's worse than a natural disaster, because if it's a hurricane or an earthquake, you can rebuild the country. While these conflicts go on for 10 years, it's a perpetual disaster. So the magnitude of the human welfare cost that also is a challenge of our time, and also another reason why that ex-Muslims who are challenging this ideology are the most important voice. I believe they are the most important voice in looking for the future solution to this entire problem. So that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to say thank you all for coming, and the reason why I think it's so important, and the reason why we need to keep trying to support ex-Muslims. Thank you.